So first of all, thank you for being on. I know I appreciate it. I know other people here already appreciate it. In fact, it was some people in the community who brought it up in the first place. Um, to give some background, and you can add or take away anything. And this is all from things I've gotten from your channel. For those who don't know Dr. Mick, he is a licensed therapist. He has a PhD in human development. Um, he's the host of the Game Sessions with a Therapist, where he focuses on destigmatizing therapy and providing mental health information in a responsible and ethical way while playing games with an incredible community.
And that's you know what of all the people who ever attempted to do my pitch on my behalf, that's the best one so far, man. You have you
Hey,
have you have the distinction of the best ones. It's so people will try it and they'll be like, oh, I don't know how you remember it. So it's just go check them out. So that was awesome. Thank you.
I wrote it because there was no way I was going to be. I wrote down a bunch of stuff too. I was all right. Education, clinical specialty, because I didn't know if people you had you had said something before when we were talking initially that you some of the things you had specialized in were anxiety in particular and also OCD. So I was like, oh,
Yeah.
these are good things to know, good things to let other people know too. So um, yeah. So is there anything else you'd like to say about yourself first that you think is important that doesn't get covered by that initial blurb?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I'm a big fan of yours, man. I quite enjoy watching your streams and listen. If you are ever on and I have a task I have to complete and you are playing music, you are on in the background for me. I just want to say that I very much appreciate what you do, and I am truly a fan of your. I play guitar, but not even remotely close to at the level that you do because I didn't study it or anything. But I love listening to you play. So I'm a fan of yours. That's one thing that doesn't get covered by that. But I do specialize in working with severe and debilitating anxiety. OCD is one of my, it sounds weird when I say this, but it's one of my favorite things to work with, but it's horrible for people who have it, as I know we'll talk about.
Mm.
And I also work with performance anxiety. I also work with like esports performance, and I do work with like relationships, couples, polyamorous relationships, and stuff like that. So I'm trained to work with multiple people in the room, even though really more than half of my current caseload is individuals. But so it's sort of like all over, but I know that there's a lot of overlap with what you had wanted to talk about, and so I'm excited to kind of chat today and conversation with you about it and stuff. And I do, by the way, have your chat open so I can see people in chat as well, so you don't have to worry about relaying chat to me.
Okay, cool. And I'll be if you I'm gonna be writing down like questions or stuff I see that I think maybe we can talk about. But if I don't know if you want to do the same too, if there's anything I miss or you think is important, because like this wasn't
Yeah,
meant to be like nothing like super formal. But I figured if we're gonna do this, or it actually just um, started because for those who are unaware, it's like I've had a lot of issues for a long time. They end up coming up on stream. I just can't help it. As much as I try to hide things,
sure.
it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Um,
Oh yeah, that actually. I don't mean to cut you off, but that
no,
actually
you're
does
good.
remind me of the one thing I wanted to make sure I say. I know most of the people here know this, but I'm not here in any way, shape, or form to diagnose SNAF, to provide any therapeutic advice. Any questions I answer in chat, I'll answer in general ways. I'm not his therapist. We don't have a signed service agreement or anything like that. This is educational purposes. He's going to talk about his experience, and that's cool. And I'll riff off of it and stuff like that. But I just want to be very clear to everybody that like I am in no way, shape, or form conducting therapy here. And if I have to stop a question or if I have to say I can't answer that, it's not because I don't care. It's because I can't answer it. So it's not Schnap's. responsibility to know what my ethical boundaries are. It's mine. And I know you mentioned that a little bit ago, but I just wanted to make sure I reiterated that for people because I think it's really important. Because I'm excited to hear kind of like what you have to say, and I know you're looking forward to hearing what I have to say. And we're still going to be able to interact, but I just want to make sure everybody in chat knows this is not me doing a session or an interview with Schnapp in any shape or form.
Yeah, that's super important. Yeah, that's major. So I appreciate that, and we'll all try to do everything to make that just be as easy as possible. Because in some of the things, so like I said, it had come up because I was having issues, and someone had messaged me privately. Because sometimes I say to people, it's like, I won't talk about this, but if you really want to know, maybe you question something, or maybe you just want to know more or help out or something, people reach out. It's like, feel free to DM me, and people have done that, and so I've been a little given like more details there. And someone recently was like, maybe you should say this to people, because there's like a lot that is as sometimes as bad as things can get on stream. It's actually like worse than that. So
Sure. And I admire you for your willingness to talk about it, by the way. It's not always as easy as it may appear to talk about these things, especially in this platform. So I have a great deal of respect for you and your willingness to kind of share with people your experience, whether it's through DM or whether it's while you're live like this. I think that's really cool.
Well, I appreciate it. I try. For me personally, like at this point, like I've been dealing with this stuff for more than half my life. I'm 33, and like first time with psychiatrist and any sort of like actual diagnosis, like clinical diagnosis, when I was 15. So it's been like 18 years of this. So this is like at this point, I'd be lying if I said there was no conscious or subconscious sort of shame or self-stigma type thing, right? Like I'm not like proud of it. I'm not like, what's up guys, I'm a depressed person, like this is awesome, one day maybe you can be depressed too and it'll be cool. Like I'm not like right. It's not a good thing, but I'm not like, oh, I don't know, or maybe it's not real. Like I'm more hesitant, partly for other people because it can be really uncomfortable for everyone, and also like it's not I don't think it's good for the stream all the time. Maybe in little bits or like in a moment like this where it's like sectioned off, like, okay, we will talk about this. It can be beneficial. So like I try to think about it, it's like, will this thing be beneficial or not? Now, as a lot of people have seen, that's not always, doesn't always work out like that.
Are you talking about like when you feel it self-manifest and then like you're trying to figure out, is this something that I want to like overtly display here, or do I need to kind of keep it capped in order to continue doing what I'm doing in a live space like this?
Exactly.
Is that what you mean? Okay.
Yeah. So things will come up, and that gets into maybe like the first part of this stuff is like things come up, and like we've noticed patterns, and I could try to all sorts of tricks to just sort of try to ignore it, and so hopefully that it doesn't show and we can focus on the music or whatever's happening, but it almost never works, where I'll try to do it and I'll still just be like super anxious, and the more that happens I just get more and more anxious, and then people notice even if I don't say anything. It's like, is he all right, or like, are you okay, did something happen? It's like, oh god. And then I get to the place where like I don't feel like lying when that happens, but I also don't want to ignore them, but then I don't want to bring the thing up, and it's just like we just get stuck, and it's like there's no good situation, like doesn't seem to be a very good outcome, at least at the moment.
There's a this may speak a little bit to your experience, but it's something that I know that I come across a lot, and I'm sure some people in chat will also probably resonate with this, that when people struggle with whatever mental illness it may be, it doesn't have to be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be OCD, it could be ADHD or whatever. There is this, because I mean we call these things mental health, but there's also, like, if you ever hear it in a professional capacity, we call it behavioral health, because there's a performative aspect to it. There's like when you really don't know that somebody is struggling with something until they show it to you that they're struggling, right? So like if you're, in a space like this where you're live in front of lots of people and you have an anxiety spiral, people really only ever see it if it shows up. And so people, or like if you attend to it, right? Like on
Mm,
stream. So what happens is a lot of people, when they feel an anxiety spiral coming on, or if there's a compulsion that's coming, or if depression's grabbing a hold of them, hit this fork in the road that it sounds like you're describing, which is, do I stuff this as best I can at the risk of not acknowledging that it's happening for me, which may have latent consequences in the form of like actually holding me down even further because I'm basically not attending to it? Or do I perform it? And I don't mean perform in a false sense. I mean, like, do I actually behave in a way that's consistent with acknowledging what's going on for me? And that's
yep.
something I think so many people with any form of mental illness or just struggle deal with, because we have so many expectations just on everyday life of how people are supposed to show up to various social contexts and stuff. And a lot of times the way mental illness manifests itself doesn't align with that. So there's this whole spiral of anxiety that happens where we're not meeting that expectation, and we have to figure out, do I want to change that expectation to myself here and now, or do I want to change the manifestation of this and fit the expectation that's there? It's a really hard thing to juggle, and I know a lot of people really struggle with, how do I attend to this versus and show it versus how do I hold it back if the situation calls for it. And as you've said, sometimes it's harder than others.
Mm.
So I know that's sort of me kind of taking it and making it a bit more of like a general statement on stuff, but it's something that I think is unfortunate because of the set of expectations that people have, where it's hard for people to kind of like let it be, but also it can be hard to watch sometimes somebody struggle. And that's not an indictment on you or anybody else who struggles in a public forum like that, but it can be. And then sometimes people end up setting boundaries with that can be hard and kind of perpetuate a spiral.
Yeah, there's actually so a couple things came up there. Um, One of the things I was initially wanted to get at is like this came about from like the idea to do this from issues I had, but it's
Hmm.
I thought it'd be good to be able to take it to more general things like you did, and and some of the questions and things uh, people have asked and that we plan to talk about are about that, not me specifically, because so much of this, it's not just me. I'm like not the only person. And in fact, the other day on stream, I was thinking about, I was like, what is going on here? Where like it seems to be the norm on Twitch and like with like content creation on Twitter and all this stuff, where it's like everybody has so many of these issues. And I kind of like did it in somewhat of a joking manner, where it's like all these, like you'll see so many tweets where it's like me when I have to get up or something, and it's just like a cat that like looks miserable or something. Everyone's like mood, and they love like they
Yeah.
love it, and like so many people seem to be struggling with so many of these things. But it gets like a lot of it can get really confusing
Yeah.
because we're also supposed to be like content creator people, where it's like, what's up guys, positivity, let's kill it, everything's awesome, you're great, I'm great, let's do this,
Yeah.
we can all do it, life awesome. And people, and like that's understandable too, that like, oh, I'm gonna go onto this stream and the person's gonna be like, everything sucks and I hate it. Like
Yeah.
I totally get that. um so I don't know why exactly that seems to be the case with what we're doing, or perhaps it's only exposed in this world of streaming and social media, and maybe just other aspects of life or other areas of life they don't.
Well, I mean, I include me in this because obviously I'm a streamer too. I mean, we are public facing. I mean, no matter how many people are watching us, right? Like if there's 10 people watching, if there's 10,000 people watching, like we're public facing. So one of the things that I think puts us in a delicate space is, first of all, we all struggle, right? Like just because you have like a bad day, just because maybe you don't want to get out of bed someday, just because you're having a hard time focusing one day doesn't mean you have a mental illness.
Mm.
Like we've kind of gotten into this space right now where like people think like, oh, I must have generalized anxiety disorder because I'm anxious about a test that's coming up. And it's like, no, anxiety, as I'm sure I'm going to repeat myself 1,000 times while we talk today, anxiety is not bad. Anxiety just is. When we get into disordered responses, we're talking about like very like more like serious stuff that actually fits a diagnosable criteria. But I think when we're in like social media or spaces like this, people identify with, oh man, I had a hard time waking up today, and people go, yeah, I've been there, right? So there's like a generalized empathy there. But I think what's puts us in a precarious position with it is how real do you want to be with it and how do you want to represent it? Because there are some instances where, say, a person struggles with depression. And obviously, I'm not talking about you specifically. In general, like there might be somebody who struggles with depression and they are actively holding it back on stream, which may be fine for what they're trying to do, but then they might shame or project whatever shame they have about the depression onto their like community or their viewership, or they might represent it on social media in a way where they're like, it's not a big deal, guys, anybody can live with this, like don't let depression get you down. And I think that's where people
Y-
start to run into problems because you are in a space where there are more eyeballs on you than you have eyeballs on them, and as a result, like we have to present stuff in a way that is a representation of it that isn't necessarily going to perpetuate problems, even if it is something that we ourselves may struggle with. It's okay to be boundaried about it and maybe okay to say, hey
mm.
guys, hold on a second. Like, I'm having a hard time right now. Today's been a hard day. Depression's really been kicking my ass lately. And, I'm sure there are people here that can relate to that. And I'm fighting through it as best I can. I kind of have my ways of doing it. So just bear with me for a second. Like, that kind of thing is awesome. If a person's like, hey, yeah, I struggle with depression, but fuck that. I'm not, depression doesn't have to get you down. You're weak if you let depression get you down. I'm here despite depression. That kind of thing can send a really poor message to people who are struggling. And so I think that's kind of the space that we occupy that is a little bit difficult is how do I talk about this in a way that's a good representation of it, but also where I'm able to still bring what I'm trying to do to the space. Cause like, if I had a day where I don't want to get out of bed and now I can't, like I can't, I don't want to bring myself to stream. I'm not bringing my product. I'm not generating my income, like all this stuff. And it creates this really complex thing. So I think it's more about how we represent it more than anything else.
Mm. I know for myself, and I talk about this too, that like I try to be as real as possible with it. And a lot of the times that doesn't sound, it doesn't on the face of it like sound good when I speak and act that out. So like, for example, that the last example that you gave, that's like, you don't let depression get you down. You can do it, all that sort of stuff. And like in you're weak if you don't, like just be better and stuff. Like it sounds positive at first, something like that, like inspirational, but like I really don't think it is. It doesn't, for me, for someone who deals with it, it doesn't feel like that for a bunch of reasons. I'm not sure exactly why people tend to do that. I think it can be different for each person, and also there can be multiple things. Perhaps the person motivates themselves like in that way by speaking it out and being like acting it out. Maybe they're just trying to help out. I think a lot of it always seems like people who, when that situation comes up, they mean well, and this is something that comes up on stream that's huge. That's like people, I'll be struggling with something, and people will try to help out, and they won't, like what they're doing ends up kind of making things worse, perhaps by just saying something that's maybe not true. Like it's okay, like it'll all be fine, or you'll get over it, or like you don't have to be this way, or something like this, or I'll play some, like with music specifically, it's like totally mess up piece. It's like it really is like missing like 25% of the notes and stuff like that. And like, no, it's like a great performance. And I find myself in this situation where it's like, I know they're trying to help out and like be positive and stuff like that. And it's like outside of, the person enjoying it or not, it's like, I feel like I have to agree with them, in which case I'm lying and like I feel weird doing it.
Yeah.
Or we almost get into like an argument where it's like, well, no, it wasn't, and like here's why, and our standards are different. What we're looking at is different. But I don't know if you have any sort of theories or like any different insight into why you think people take on this like super positive, like
Yeah.
almost, I hesitate to use the word toxic, but like kind of, because it's like if you're not positive, then like there's something bad about not just being like, I'm still gonna kill it, like we're gonna do this.
Yeah, I think it gets into. I mean, I'm always careful with the as it sounds like you are too. Like I'm always careful with the toxic positivity thing because it's a very like weird concept. But it can be when it becomes basically what you're talking about is two things. There's kind of a two pronged aspect of this kind of situation. Is I think the first one is when people see somebody struggling, particularly somebody they care about, right? And I think it's easy to say that anybody who is in a stream context watching us cares about us in some way.
Mm,
I wouldn't watch somebody I don't care about. So when when a person sees somebody struggling, particularly if they have an empathetic response to it or an empathic response, I prefer empathic response to it. Um, there is the first part, which is I want that person to feel better. I care about that person. I value happiness. I value satisfaction. I want that person to be able to achieve it and experience it, which is, as you say, very well intentioned. And I don't think anybody would dispute that that's well intentioned.
mm,
But then there's the second part, which is the part we don't talk about very often, and it's the part that makes it really muddy because it's the part that becomes invalidating for the person that's actually struggling, which is that when we watch somebody struggle, particularly if we empathize deeply and don't have a good way of separating that from ourselves, it makes us uncomfortable to watch somebody struggle. And sometimes what people will do is use the person who's struggling as a conduit to diminish their own experience of discomfort in that moment. So they might say something like, okay, wow, this person's really struggling right now. They're having a hard time. They've missed some notes or something like this. And like, oh, I feel like how awful that must feel for this person. I'm going to say something that I perceive to be empowering to this person to make them feel better because if they come around and if they feel better, I'll feel better because I don't have to sit with the discomfort of my empathy for what's going on for that person, which puts the person who's struggling in a very precarious spot because there's a pressure to, as you're talking about, like agree, right? And sort of like satiate that thought and say, yeah, you're right. It is fine. And that sometimes is like, oh, it feels weird because it's invalidating of your experience, but it's reassuring to the person who's sending that message your way. And it creates a very funky dissonance. When in reality, the thing that usually is helpful is if you see somebody struggling, and this goes for anybody watching this, is like when you see somebody struggling, just empathize. Like, you don't, it's not your job to make them feel better. You can give some encouragement, but first, like, hey, how are you doing? Like, it seems like that kind of, it seems like you're frustrated with that. It seems like you're having a hard time with that. Like, how are you doing? You all right? And then you're like, oh yeah, I'm just like, I missed some notes. I struggle with that. That sucks. Or man, I'm just not feeling it today. I'm having a hard time showing up and answering questions in chat or whatever. Bear with me. And then people go, well, hey, I believe in you, but I also understand the struggle, and that makes a lot of sense, and we're here for you. That usually lands better than like, you got this, push through, because it's invalidating of a person's experience. It doesn't meet them where they're at first. It's like trying to yank them up the mountain.
mm. And that gets to like part of what I see in uh, chat too, where it's like I feel like even if I acknowledge it and just sort of let it go, it feels invalidating. And I've mentioned that too, and I've tried to uh, even like articulate that that's the case and be like, hey, I think you mean well, and I think I try to like separate things out to get it as like clear as possible so we can see um, where things are kind of going wrong. So, for example, with the music one, it seems to be that I'll be like, okay, there's a difference between you enjoying the piece, and I can't tell you ever that you didn't enjoy it. But what I'm speaking about, like when I'm like down on myself, it's like, guys, right now, like I didn't play well. I don't mean that you didn't enjoy it or something like that, but it's like there's a certain standard and there's a certain expectation that I have of myself, and that's different than, someone just enjoying the music, and like that's not there. So then when I get told like no, it is there, it's like, well, you're just now telling me like I'm
Yeah.
wrong in my thing. And it's like
Yeah.
that's really like I promise I know the person doesn't mean it that way, and I know they're trying to help, and I know they're talking about like when they say like they enjoyed the performance, but it's like there are things that were wrong with that, and like in a certain sense that's fine. Like it's not good, at least for me. Like I don't want to play poorly or something, but it seems to be better to be like, yeah, that wasn't okay, and maybe you can work on it or something like that, instead of being like, no, your impression of that like wasn't accurate and mine is. And like sometimes it's weird. I'm just like, I'll bring up a performance like, hey, let's watch this, and I'll play this, like, whoa, that was crazy. It's like, yeah, that was the piece I just played when actually like played right. And it's like, oh, it's like um
Yeah.
this is what's going on in my head. This is what I see. I'm like intimately connected with these pieces, so I'll notice things that aren't there. And again, it just feels invalidating when it's like, no, it was okay. Like your perception of this is off.
Well, there's an interesting like recursive process that's happening there. I guess in this case it would be between you and Chad, but I think this translates to any relationship. Is our desire as humans, with even though we have amazingly developed brains, they're still not there yet. To have things be nice right angles and straight edges that all fit together perfectly. And that's because our brain hates dissonance. So really what we're talking about here, like the actual truth of the situation, is a what's called a both and, which is person enjoys the performance, and this is something that people who perform deal with all the time, as you know, is person enjoys the performance but has a limited possible scope of like kind of what the intricacies of the performance itself are.
Mm.
And then there's person who has more of a mastery level understanding of what's going on, who's doing the performing, who knows you could have just missed a tiny little ghost note and you know you missed it, but nobody in the audience potentially picked it up, but you know it's there. And you might be disappointed that you missed that certain part as the performer, right? So those two things coexist. So it's one of those things where if we hold those conflicting ideas at the same time, that I could have enjoyed it while simultaneously this person might not have enjoyed it or might have an understanding of it that there's a different standard there, it creates dissonance in our head where like I don't want to hold both of those ideas in that head. To watch this person say, it's why we don't really like it when we say to people, oh, I love that movie, and somebody goes, oh, I didn't like that movie. And you're like, wait a minute, but you're somebody I care about, but you don't like the thing that I liked. I don't like holding that simultaneously. I need you to have liked it too, or to have found something. It's like that, only in a much more nuanced way. And so we collectively, like in that type of space, collectively, everybody has to hold the dissonance. And we don't have really any of us a good like education or chance to learn how to do that, or to build the distress tolerance that it takes to do that, where a person could say, you know what, I really loved that for what I needed to love that for, and I see that he's not happy with how that performance went. And for some people it's like, wait a minute, did I miss something? Should I be more adept at understanding this music? Am I an idiot because I didn't catch this and he did, or something like that? There's all sorts of explanations for why that can happen. But the dissonance itself is what's going to create a level of anxiety that just sort of bubbles. And people aren't particularly adept at navigating that. They try to shove it in their boxes that they're used to.
Yeah, it's definitely weird. It's like funny with the movie thing, or like I like this, you don't. It's like because it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't really ultimately
Right.
matter, but it seems to matter to us. There was something else that like came up in chat, and like this brings up another side of this, which is like I am unable to. So it's like, why don't you just, knowing that this is the case, okay, knowing that they're just being trying to help out, and knowing that they're unaware of the specifics of the music, most likely, which is also difficult to address, because it can come across as insulting when it really shouldn't. And the thing I've been like trying to say more and more is that like there's no reason that anyone in the stream should be intimately familiar and not and knowledgeable about the repertoire I'm playing. Like, why would you have taken that time? And even if you're another guitarist, maybe you do for some of the pieces, but like, why would you, like, we don't know most things. And it seems like there's, to be like, hey, perhaps you don't know about this thing. It's like, what? It's like, why would you know? Why would you know? Why would you be really familiar with like every box, like lute suite that exists? Like, why? That's totally fine if like the person playing the music knows more than you about that. And then there's surely something you know more about that they don't. So that can be tough to like, to bring that up in a not insulting way. Cause it seems to, you know what? It seems to get like tied back in with the subjective experience of like whether I like it or not. Right. So it's like, oh, you just told me that like I don't understand, like I don't know everything that's going on in this piece. Oh, so I don't know about music or I can't like it or something like that. That's the impression that that I get. But like the thing that ends up being extra tricky for all of this is that I know I'm not the only one, but I can't seem to rationalize away the feelings and the thoughts that I have. So I can't just simply tell myself, well, this person's just trying to help out, and this person also doesn't know the music very well, so it's okay. The thoughts are still there, and they just keep coming up. And like when I say, just to be clear for everyone, when I say like I have OCD, I don't mean like I'm so OCD. I mean like the 4 clinical diagnoses I've gotten over my life from multiple people are depression, anxiety, OCD, and actually, well, initially ADD, like years ago, but ADHD. So like these ruminating thoughts, these recurring thoughts are like, it's just not so simple as to just like push them away or stop thinking them, or the feelings that they bring up. I can't just rationalize them away because they weren't like rationalized into existence in the first place. So just feel them regardless. So I don't know if that's from your experiences, either I don't know what you've personally dealt with, but maybe professional, what I don't know what you think about all that side of things, the OCD side of things.
Yeah. All right. So
Sorry, there's a lot.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, I'm just trying to kind of like organize kind of my thoughts, because there were a few different things you said where I was like, ooh. So I'll answer the OCD thing in a second, but I want to say that I think the like this sense that you know more about the thing than other people, right? Like there is this, I hate to go like this societal route, but I have to. There's a societal wave right now that's been going on for a couple years in general that I think all of us have been subjected to, and some of us have probably even fallen prey to in a lot of ways, where expertise and mastery is seen as threatening. It's seen as this thing where it's this elitist thing that anybody who's got an expertise is going to talk down and highlight what I don't know. And we're embedded in a system where if you don't know, you're often seen as like weak or dumb or stupid. And there's this thread that weaves through everything. This is not an indictment on your chat. It's not an indictment on mine. It's not an indictment on anybody's chat. It's sort of an indictment on the context we're embedded in, which is where if I see somebody who knows more about something that I care about or that impacts me, it's very threatening to me, because they may suggest something that I don't know, and I have to confront my own lack of education on this. And because we're so inundated with this idea that we should know all things at all times because all information's at our fingertips and we're going to be tested on it at any given point in time, there's a passive anxiety that rises for people in that. But they go, wait, holy shit, I hear this person talk about this thing and they're talking about it in this way and I don't understand it. It must be because they're manipulating me. It must be because they're trying to be this elitist overlord, and they're trying to make me feel dumb. And so often that is not the case. Expertise is not something threatening, it's something to be celebrated. And in a lot of ways, expertise in one area suggests a lack of expertise in many others. Like I have a kind of a fun little saying I say on my stream all the time, which is I say smart stuff about mental health and dumb shit about everything else. And it's in part because like I can, yes, I talk adeptly about mental health. Yes. If you and I were to start talking about music, you'd blow me out of the water. Just it wouldn't even be remotely close. And so that is something that a lot of us have to realize. If I was going to talk to you about music, you do know more than I do. And that's okay. That's an opportunity for me to learn from you. That's an opportunity for me to approach that with curiosity and respect that you've put the time in to understand what it is that you're doing, to know the theory of what you're doing. And that is something that is so cool and brings such a richness. And that if we start to have many people with many broad ranges of expertise, we start to see how wonderful all of the diversity of that is. So we're just sort of conditioned right now to see expertise as something that's threatening. And so it's fighting a battle that's not even necessarily specific to this context. It's part
Mm.
of the system we're embedded in, which is to see that as something where like, well, I love music and I'm watching this musician, and this musician's telling me something about this music that I don't necessarily follow or understand. And I would look at anybody in that instance and say, well, here's an opportunity to ask a question. Here's an opportunity to learn something from somebody who knows maybe a little bit more about this than you do because he went to school for it. Right?
Yeah, it's like
Like you spent a lot of time, like you went to college for music, right?
yeah.
Yeah. And like I went to college to learn. I had the, the wonderful privilege to be able to go to college. I know not everybody has that ability, and that's a whole indictment on a whole other thing that's not even remotely close to this conversation. But like, I was blessed to be able to get an education to be able to learn these things, and I try to bring it in the same way you try to bring what you do to the masses, and that's, I think, something to be celebrated. So I just wanted to address that because I think it's helpful for all of us to understand that like we are embedded in that system right now. And if we're not careful, it can grab us in ways we're not anticipating. And it shows up in these little micro instances.
No, I totally
Um,
agree. Yeah.
so as far as the intrusive thoughts part of it, where you're talking about like some of the like OCD stuff, I want to be clear to people, as I'm sure you have been before, that like I would not wish OCD on my worst enemy. It is a truly debilitating, like horrible internal process that happens for people that can feel inescapable. And I don't know if this is your experience. I'm guessing based on the fact that if you've been diagnosed with it, it probably is. But like it is truly a internal prison that I think a lot of people don't understand because of how poor, like in the way you framed that, you said, I just want to say, like, I'm not one of those people that's like, I'm so OCD. And the reason you have to do that is because of how poorly represented OCD is. Like OCD gets so thrown into like general language of like, oh, well, I like when my desk is clean. I like when my coffee mug is just perfectly visible in the frame because I think that looks nice. That's not, there's a very good chance that's not OCD because I
Mm.
could be like, all right, well, if I put it over here, like, okay, whatever. Okay. So the wanting things clean, wanting things orderly, okay, like whatever. Like that's what it is. But to say it's OCD is to take something that is utterly debilitating and make it something that's like to be seen as quirky and laughed at. And so I think already if people are approaching that kind of process from that perspective, they're going to miss the mark. In some ways, understandably so, on what it is to actually understand what that process is, because the intrusive thoughts and compulsions that come along with OCD, as you said, are not manufactured. They're not something that you're sitting there saying, yeah, I'm going to say all these nasty things about myself. I'm going to say all these, like, that's not how that works. It's something where, like, no matter how much you try to override it, you have those thoughts continue to, I'm talking about the collective you,
Mm.
but like that we have these like, we have these intrusive thoughts. All of us experience intrusive thoughts. The example I always use for people, and I'm sure every single person in chat has had this happen. When you have a song stuck in your head, that's an intrusive thought, right? Like if you're like, oh God, I'm like, I woke up singing the Bee Gees this morning and I really don't like the fact that I have the Bee Gees in my head right now. That's an intrusive thought. It's any thought you don't want to have in your mind. OCD takes that to the next level, which is you get intrusive thoughts, they get directed inward, they turn into compulsions that increase anxiety that lead to behavioral manifestations that are an attempt to mitigate that anxiety in the short term that actually cause an issue in the long term. There's a disconnect in the way that a person is able to see a reinforcement or a reassurance mechanism as actually mitigating the thing that they are having the compulsion about. And it's a trap that people get stuck in, and it's really, really brutal. And so I don't know if like you certainly don't have to answer this, but like if you're like if you have an example of like what one of those intrusive thoughts would sound like, so people kind of know what that sounds like, because it's like people don't get it if they don't understand like what it is that a person's fighting against when it happens. Again, you don't have to answer that. I'm not trying to prod.
No, that's exactly like, and the word prison seems to be good. It's like a mental torture that you can't escape from because it's always there. Uh, I even have difficulties in even attempting to like distract or sometimes even try to numb that thing. So like some of the recurring some of the things that come back are like they're almost like really stereotypical. It's like you are uh okay, so it's typically not one single thought. It's actually, for at least for me, entire conversations. So and not like, I'm not like actually like having a hallucination of a voice, but it's this really really deep um devil's advocate, really really like nasty voice where like everything I say, there's like I combat it I combat it instantly, and like it's impossible to fight. So it's like, okay, that piece, like, that wasn't good enough. All right, so I make a mistake, and it's like, all right, made a mistake, and so then it's like thought that comes in, that wasn't good enough. It's like, no, it's okay. It's like, yeah, but if it's I actually mentioned this on stream a couple days ago. It's like people already classical music already isn't popular, and you're already struggling with stream growth and stuff like that. So even if you were to play perfectly, you'd still have trouble. So not playing perfectly makes it even worse. There's no chance. It's like, well, this isn't really helping out. It's like, well, you're never going to be able to do this. Then it's like you focus on chat, and it's like, oh, things are really slow. See, this is why the things are slow. And then I become aware of the fact that I'm thinking this and start to get
Yep.
nervous, and it's like waves of heat and more thoughts, and it's like, oh, now they can see this. Now they're seeing that you're doing this. Oh, you're doing this again. When you said you're going to try at least for today to like not do this, well, you're failing again. Think about all the other times. Like, when was the last time you didn't freak out like this? Yeah, you're never going to be able to not do this. Oh, you're trying all these things to make it better. Well, it's clearly not working. Hey, should you be saying this stuff out loud instead of just thinking it? They can probably already
Yep.
tell that you're
Yep.
like super distracted by stuff. Maybe you should say it, but then it's like people are going to be pushed away by this. People have already told you that they've been pushed away from your stream by this negative stuff, and like it can keep going. It can keep going on. Like, and that is there's no stopping that line of stuff, and that comes with physical things. So like a huge one for me is like actual like increase in heart rate, and like just waves of heat where I'll start uh sweating. It's like there's just
Yeah.
nothing, there's just no stopping it. It's all negative, and it's all super brutal and harsh, that leads to like worthless, not good enough, no one can, like, you're never gonna do. It's like really really terrible stuff, and it's just all the time.
Yeah, and so I appreciate you sharing that. I'll try to provide a little bit of context for anybody who's watching that and is thinking like, "Holy shit, that must be horrible. Why does that happen?" And maybe you have this question too, but so OCD is very much rooted in anxiety. So it's and I got to give a little bit of context. I'll give a little bit of context to chat about kind of what anxiety is. Anxiety is a emotion that we experience that's activating and is risk mitigating. When back in the evolutionary days, we're still evolving, but like back when we were like constantly at danger in our environment, anytime there was something that was uncertain, or presents itself as a risk, but you can't quite figure out whether it's a risk or not, your brain is wired to focus on that thing and develop a physiological response that puts you into a space where you do whatever you have to do to mitigate that risk. So we experience anxiety due to uncertainty as a result of that. And it basically says, I need to figure this out or I need to get the hell away from it. Because if I don't, I'm in danger. Ambiguity is danger. Well, now we live in a relatively safe world, and you combine that with a prefrontal cortex that's evolved to have a little bit more of an ability to think complexly and develop these like symbols that are, as we move into adulthood, become increasingly more abstract. And that is a dual recipe for disaster if it goes off the rails. So, one of the ways that I, as a therapist, understand OCD and help people move to understand is that OCD and the anxiety associated with it is actually protective. And that is something that sometimes people are like, wait, what the hell are you talking about? This thing seems like it's trying to destroy my life. And the reason oftentimes that these things come up is when a person has the initial burst of thought that says like, oh, let's say you fucked this up, or you're dirty, or you're, because dirty is often a one that gets
Mm.
people into like the hand washing and stuff, or nobody loves you, or whatever it may be, that the intrusive thought that pops in that kicks off the spiral. The reason that thought often comes in is because it's an attempt to create an explanation for the uncertainty associated with that moment. And that is a protective function. It's basically to say, you fucked this up. And if you continue to fuck up, people are going to bail and people aren't going to love you or people aren't going to do this. And so I'm going to tell you right now you messed it up, and I'm going to try to get you to leave and stop so that you spare yourself from the fact that this may happen. And so any attempt that you make to continue, engaging in this relationship or playing this song or doing whatever is an attempt to thwart what I'm trying to get you to do, which is get the hell away from here. And so people have these warring conversations that you're talking about, where you have this thing that very deeply, innately is trying to protect us. And then there's the override that comes in. And that override sometimes turns into the compulsion, but we turn it inwards. And then it becomes like, so now what's the compulsive behavior that happens as a result? Do I fight against it? Do I wipe my desk down constantly? Do I excessively seek reassurance from people? All of it is an attempt to make that core anxiety associated with what's happened go away, but it goes off the rails. And so we actually, by acting on it in the ways that we do with OCD, we actually reinforce the anxiety over time as having a lot of control over us. And the anxiety gets worse over time, and it creates this really horrible positive feedback loop of a snowball, because what we're actually attempting to do to mitigate it isn't mitigating it. It's making it worse in the long term. Good in the short term, but worse in the long term.
Mm.
An example I use often, I'm going to use sort of like one that's easy for people to understand, is one of the ways that OCD gets talked about frequently is like, with say like checking if the door is locked, where people will be like, and that really comes down to oftentimes a core anxiety related to safety and security. I don't feel safe. I'm in danger. Thus, one of the ways I can make that sense of anxiety about the danger go away is making sure that my door is locked. Now, for most of us, we lock our doors, right? I assume you lock your doors at night. I lock my doors at night. People in chat lock their doors at night. That's not a compulsive behavior insofar as you will walk up to your door at night, you will lock the door, you will look at the fact that you locked the door and go, cool, door's locked, and you'll walk away, right? The anxiety that is associated with your safety isn't intrusive anymore. With somebody with OCD, whose OCD is directed toward that security and toward the door locking, what happens is they have the anxiety that says, I'm not safe. Then they have all the intrusive thoughts that they give attention to and respond to that agrees, says, you're right, I'm not safe. I'm not safe. I'm in danger. So how do I do? I need to lock the door. So they'll walk up to the door and they'll lock the door. They'll notice that they lock the door, and then they'll start walking away, and the anxiety is gone for a second and comes back and says, nope, you're not safe. You're not safe. Are you sure you checked the door? There's a chance you didn't check the door. And if you didn't check the door, then you're really in danger. So then the person goes, oh shit. Well, I'll turn around and I'll go and I'll check the door. And they'll go down and they'll see that the door is locked, but they'll unlock it and relock it so that they feel themselves actually do it. That's the compulsive behavior that comes from the intrusive thought. They walk away, the anxiety happens again, they come back, they unlock, they lock, and they may do it 15 times before either somebody says, "Hey, you locked the door," or they'll do something like they'll walk up the stairs and they'll keep their eye on the door as they walk up the stairs to make sure that it's locked all the way up. And that person, if you stop them in that moment, will tell you they're miserable while it's happening. And it's because it's an insatiable anxiety that a person doesn't have the distress tolerance, understandably so, to fight through and reinforce for themselves, I did lock the thing, and I now have to sit with the anxiety in such a way that I do not let it dominate what's going on for me. So that's why I started kind of by saying OCD tends to be very much rooted in anxiety, because it's all about anxiety mitigation protocol that goes off the rails. So I don't know, as I'm
Mm.
saying that, if there's anything that stands out to you in terms of like how that fits your experience or whatnot, but like that's often the kind of like conceptualization that I have when I'm working with people around severe OCD, no matter what it may be that it is that they're directed toward.
Yeah, definitely. So one of them is like uh, that I've come to acknowledge and realize is that it is a good thing gone bad. It's a good mechanism gone haywire.
Yes.
Um, and also there is the idea of like it can be very hard to describe to people or like make people or help people understand because like with the door locking issue, it can be so simple to look at it and be like, well, you just locked it. How could you have not? Like, come
Yes.
on. There's no way you did. But it's like, that's not how it works. It's not, that's what I meant by like rationalizing the things into existence. It's
Hmm.
not like, it's just, the thought is just there. It's that simple. I've been trying recently to just like, to possibly help people understand by like being like, don't even try to think about it or rationalize it. Just take whatever's being said as the case. Like, it's actually that simple. It's like, if you feel that way, like, why are you thinking? Don't, the second you try to understand it, you're already like misunderstanding it because the person doing it isn't even or doesn't even need to understand it. It's that straightforward. It's just like, I'm thinking this. And like, you could get into the understanding thing. And I've done this for like a long time and I keep doing it. It's like, I'm seeing a therapist now and like talking about stuff and I can get into why this is, things of, parenting things. I know for me specifically, it's like I could point to, you know, a, a father that's very like borderline, like neurotic and also has the same sort of anxious stuff and, like demands, perfection and instills this belief that if people are not perfect, mistakes happen, and when mistakes happen, danger is present, and people can even die from this. So it's like
Hmm.
this linking between lack of perfection, even just like simply like lack of perfection equals death. And like we know that like missing a note, that lack of perfection, like again, the rational thing is like, of course no one's gonna die from missing a note, but it's like not that simple. That's not how it's been like that's not how it's been set up. So
Yep.
if you have like so it's like this voice, like this type of thinking comes up that's like seems to be from the way I understand it is like a protection from like actual danger, even when there's no chance of danger from it, or at least no immediate danger, because it could be like really indirect. Like, okay, if you mess up these notes and you do it a bunch, well, you're not gonna be able to like make some sort of living doing this, and then you'll
Yep.
be homeless, and then you'll be starving, and then you'll die. So like you can
Yeah.
even rationalize as a student where so I used to teach full time, and like that happened one time where I was like this freshman was able to do this thing. They like got a bad grade on a test, which meant their average was going to go down, which meant they weren't going to be able to get into like the next class sophomore year, the good one, which means they were on the wrong track, which means they weren't going to be able to get into like the good college, which means they weren't going to be able to secure a job, which means they weren't going to be able to pay for stuff. They weren't going to be able to have a home. They were good. And they I almost specifically took their thing. They rationalize out, and this was kind of like rational. They were like, they thought out this poor grade on this test meant starving to death.
Yeah.
And it was like, So there seems to be this protection thing, even if it's not immediately apparent. And yes, that was a freshman. I used to teach in a very, very high stress, very like high performing but high stress situation. It was actually really bad for me too, even as a
I can
teacher.
imagine. I can
It's
imagine.
terrible.
Yeah, I just say that just like reinforces a whole bunch of stuff because I got to like I can imagine some people in that case would be like, well, I mean that actually is a pretty good point. Do I need to worry about this too? Like, I mean that could get really like that could get really rough. I I think something I love that story. I mean, I don't love it for that student, obviously, but like I
I
always
know
have
you
to be
mean.
careful with how I
Just like
say
you
this
love
shit, 'cause it's
OCD.
like,
No, I
I
understand.
love human suffering. No, I don't love human suffering. I
Passionate
love
about
assisting
suffering.
people with it. Yeah. Um, so something that I have come to understand. So I've been doing therapy for 8 years, just over 8 years, and something that I've come to understand over these 8 years is if you engage in the right line of questioning, if you are genuinely curious when you approach somebody about why they're doing something that they're doing or why they're saying something that they're saying, if you do it right, you will find that anything a person does makes sense to them. Like it always makes sense. People do not do things that don't make sense to them. So, one of the things that I'm often working with people to understand when we're working through something like, say, OCD, is that the compulsive thoughts that happen do make sense. They are rational as they exist relative to each other. So the idea that you are unsafe if you don't lock your door, or that you could potentially be out of work if you miss too many notes, or that people will stop watching us if we don't show, right? Whatever it is that's like really intrusive. And I'm talking about truly intrusive thoughts here, not just the random anxieties we have, like those truly compulsive thoughts. It makes sense. It's a rational thought, which is why that continues to show up because it's basically going, "Hi, this makes sense. You really need to watch out for this. I'm trying to protect you. I'm trying to make sure that you're fine." And the anxiety gets so big that we want to get away from it. We want it to go away. And so that's what then leads to that compulsive behavior is because we're doing it. A person with OCD will tell you, this makes sense why I'm doing this. I don't like that I'm doing this. I hate that this is something that's happening for me, but I can tell you all the reasons why. And if I meet that with counter rationality, all I'm doing is, as you've kind of described, all I'm doing is being at war with myself. And so
Mm.
now not only am I anxious, not only am I worried about something that's happening, now I'm having an internal struggle of two things of rationality that further makes me anxious because I can't really hold both at once. And then the compulsions are going to win out more often than not because the person has not, by no fault of their own, has not built up the distress tolerance it takes to actually respond to the reframe with the level of oomph and energy that we tend to respond to compulsions with. So I saw a question in chat. I think it was from Claire actually about when I've mentioned the words distress tolerance. What do I mean by that? How does it affect us? One of the things that we have to do when working through something like OCD, and would be curious if you've had this experience before and working with it. And you don't, again, you never have to answer any of the questions I ask you, but I would be curious if your experience of this, if you have one, is I'm going to use the door locking example because it's so easy. Is when that person locks the door, that person has to first recognize that when they turn around to walk away from the door, the compulsive thought's going to come in. It's going to happen, right? If a person misses a note, it's going to happen, whatever it may be. That thought is inevitable at this point. So what we need to do in that moment is if like I'm the therapist there, I may even be standing with that person and say, okay, I want you to talk me through what is happening. Give me the data right now. I am locking the door. Okay, what does locking the door represent? Locking the door means that that people are no longer able to come into my apartment. I am watching myself lock the door. The door is locked. I say, now when you turn to walk away from it, how are you going to feel? That person will usually like they'll initially go, well, I'll probably feel better because I locked the door. I go, no, you're going to walk away from it and you're going to feel anxiety. That anxiety is going to lead to the compulsive thought that tells you You didn't lock the door. When that thought comes in your mind, what are you going to say to that thought in response? And that person might go, I don't know. And you go, well, you're going to say what you just said to yourself. I locked the door. I know the compulsive thought wants me to believe that I didn't, but I did. And the distress tolerance means when you feel the anxiety about it that makes you want to turn around and check the door, the way you build distress tolerance is to hang in there just a little bit longer than you normally would. It's not avoiding going back and checking the door. We can go back and check the door, but the second you want to turn around and check it, we're going to start a timer. And we're going to see how long you can hang in there with the anxiety and the excruciating feeling that you didn't lock the door. And we're going to sit there, even if it's just 1 second longer, and then we can go check the door. And what you do over time is you say, this person goes, well, I made it 10 seconds. When I hit that moment where I would have turned around to check, I made it 10 seconds. We go, well, we're going to make it 11 seconds this time. And then next time we're going to try and we're going to see if we can make it 15 seconds. And we're going to see if we can make it into the living room and walk away before you go back and check. We're going to see if we can make it to the kitchen. And over time, as this person builds this distress tolerance and has the cognitive reframe through it of, the fear is legitimate. I may be at risk if I didn't lock the door, but I watched myself lock the door. The door is locked. I'm just anxious. It's not actually real because I've done the thing that I needed to do. And now I've made it all the way this far. Okay. And this can take a long time for people because it can take hours sometimes before the pull stops. But we want to continuously move the marker, the distance between the intrusive thought and the compulsive behavior. And that's one of the ways that we move through this. So I'd be curious if that's like your experience of how like it's been framed with you, or like kind of how you've talked about it, or if you've had experience doing that and what that's like. But again, you can share as much or as little as you want.
Yeah, I'm trying to think because like that example is nice in the sense like it's like really clear, and there are things that can be measured like that. I'm trying to think about for myself in sort of similar situations, how that would match up, because so much of it just feels really chaotic and messy. Yeah. It's just like I've tried to find even clarity like within the problems and stuff, and it can be really difficult. The order at which things happen, the feelings that they bring about, recognizing it, knowing if things are better or not. I mean, you can maybe we could maybe think about missing a note. So here's the thing again. If we talk about this now, like play like I'm going to have that. Okay, so miss the note or something. That's like the door lock thing, and then the thought's going to come up. I'm not sure which behavior then the turning around is analogous to. Does that make sense? So like
it does. I could throw a hypothesis.
Yeah.
Of like, because I agree. Like when you're talking about more of like the internal processes with this, it can be a lot more complicated in terms of like if there's not a very observable behavioral manifestation. An argument could be made that like when a person's in this type of situation, that the behavior or the compulsive behavior is the clapback to the thought. So there's sort of like the attempt to diminish that thought. Like it comes in and then a person goes, no. Like there's sort of like a compulsive polarity to that thought and then it's like it's like the shit that's happening. I don't want to go there. It's just like the shit that's happening with the GameStop stock right now, where there's like this like push pull between Reddit and the hedge fund, but it's kind of like that. And so there's like this like immediate clapback. That's like, oh, you really fucked that up. It's like, no, I didn't. Like, and sometimes that's the case. Sometimes it's where does a person direct their focus? So like because I see this with performance a lot, is person misses a note and then they start to hyper focus on stuff that really has become an autonomic process over time. So now I'm focusing on the fine motor coordination that it takes to hit the proper note instead of just focusing on the meta stuff that kind of goes into the fact like that I can do this. So sometimes it's not necessarily like what you do, it's where you shift your focus. That can sometimes be the like compulsive behavior in reaction to the thought, because really what happens is when we have intrusive thoughts, the attention to the intrusive thoughts is often the thing that causes problems more so, like in how we attend to it, more so than the intrusive thought itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess that would be closer to a sort of meditative or mindfulness thing where because like the response to the automatic negative thought is basically also automatic. That's why it's like for me
Hmm.
at least the way it feels is that all this stuff is just it just happens.
Yeah, yeah.
It just happens. Um, I wonder if so like I wonder if I can hold out and try attempt to continue focusing on the music or something if that could be the thing to uh try to gradually extend. That gets tough too because you mentioned something you start focusing on the motor skills,
Hmm.
which is that tends to lead to more mistakes because now you're like
Yep.
right because now you're like focused on the physical thing which you shouldn't be doing. But it
Yeah.
seems to be better than focusing on the mistake in the past. And also, I wonder if the other thing I was thinking is possibly if the behavior could actually be a behavior and perhaps extend the amount of time I go between having the feeling or the negative thoughts or whatever and speaking it out and bringing it up in chat or on stream. Um, but I'll
The
have to, yeah.
Well, so you know, the playing around with ideas of that, I mean, obviously is something that you like you be able to kind of figure out and play with and all this. The thing that I would say is kind of like the umbrella concept within that process is so many people who struggle with OCD will describe the process the same way that you just did, which is it feels like it just happened. Like it's like something that just it it goes through. I have no control over it. It's like these thoughts just show up and I'm like, "What the hell is going on?" I'll just be it's like sometimes like an out of body experience for people where they're like, "I'm like watching myself wash my hands constantly. I'm watching myself move through my apartment and throw shit away that I just bought because I need the apartment to be as clean as it can possibly be." Like, I mean, I've seen all waves of the spectrum on this. And the common thread always is it just happens. And one of the hardest shifts for a person to make that's embedded in what you're describing is this idea that there is a level of control in there that you or anybody else has that is just hard to see. And I often am trying to work with people to empower them to see that the intrusive thoughts are not the thing you necessarily control. That like we that if we focus our energy on that, we're going to be hanging around this for a very long time. The thing that mostly people will find a level of empowerment in is their ability to respond to the thought or to the conversation, right? So if you have one intrusive followed by another intrusive, and then the war itself is something that's being observed, you still have power as the observer of that conversation to step in to the conversation and say like, "Hey, I'm going to cut this shit short and here's how we're going to respond to it." So it's one of those things where it's like, where does a person find agency? If they find it in where they direct their focus, that can be really helpful. If they find it in how they direct the conversation, whatever it may be, we want to help a person find the agency that they have and start to frame it in a meta sense of this is something that I have influence over. I just have to find where it is and exert it. And that's really hard to do sometimes, especially first starting out, because it just gets so heavily conditioned as an automatic process. And sometimes people will hear me say that, and I want to sort of preempt this with anybody in chat who might be thinking this. Sometimes people hear me say this and they say, "Well, Dr. Mick, isn't that really invalidating of a person's experience of OCD? Like you saying that they have control when they're adamant that they don't, isn't that you invalidating them?" And it's an invalidation of the OCD. OCD wants people to believe that they don't have control. OCD is something that steps in and basically says, like, "I've got this. I'm driving the bus. You don't get to drive the bus." So I'm happy to invalidate OCD. I want to empower the person. And that's something that we have to do. We have sort of have to hold ourselves kind of like hold the OCD accountable to the fact that it's taking over in a way that it doesn't deserve to, despite its good intentions.
That makes sense. And even So I can see why someone like may say that perhaps. Okay, so like um it's interesting you talk about it's like find where the control ends up being and maybe it's like really really far removed from the immediate struggle. So something I've tried to think about is like I feel like I'm a program. I have like this set protocol or procedure for certain situations, and when that program runs, there's there's no stopping it. So perhaps the
Yep.
control is setting things up when that situation is not happening, and
Yep.
attempting to like rewrite the program while the issue is not happening, while things are more calm, to be set up for success. Now that seems to be really difficult for a few different reasons. One, you're like removed from it, but also it's possibly you're trying to rewrite a program that's like 20 years old, maybe something like that. And this thing's
Legacy
been,
software.
it's yeah, and it's just been you've been running this software your entire life without even realizing it, and so now you're going to go ahead and like change that without even realizing what it even is. Because I feel like you mentioned the out of body experience. I was literally just saying this like a few days ago. The example I used was something I've always been able to understand, even though I've always been like skinny pretty much,
Hmm?
are people who are overweight and eat and don't exercise and stuff like that. And I've always understood the sort of classic like I can like really put myself in the position of someone who's overweight, walks to the freezer, grabs the ice cream, knows they're doing it, knows it's bad, maybe thinking shameful stuff and just like eating it. Like like that makes so much sense to
Yeah.
me. Cause I do the same things where it's like, I'm not in control of myself. Like it's easy to be like, just don't do the thing you're doing. But I'm like, I'm just watching myself do like poor decisions. I'm totally aware of. I'm like, I just keep doing it. I just keep doing it. I'm
Yep.
just doing bad. I'm doing dumb stuff. I'm not setting myself up for success later, whether it's sleeping or like mentioning these things on stream. Um, I'm now really negative and I'm talking about this stuff and I realize it's bad, but like I shouldn't. I'm still doing it. I'm just going. I'm just going.
Yep.
There's
Yep.
just no stopping it. And as I'm like almost trying to stop it, it's like, nope, nothing's happening. It's just still going. I'm
Yep.
just going along, just watching myself make these like bad decisions. And it seems like the only thing is dealing with it. Perhaps that control comes.
So let me ask you a
Yeah.
hypothetical question with this that I always, and I promise there's a point to me asking this question and
Okay.
I'll clarify it. Okay. Um, so let's use that example. Like I'm eating something even though really I don't want to be eating it. Um, tell me what not eating that thing would be.
Um, if I understand right, the thinking of not eating it is not a thing. Like there's no
Correct.
replacement action. It's
Yes.
just nothing. That's
So that's exactly the reaction I was hoping that you were going to have because that's the same reaction everybody has whenever I ask them that question. People often set a goal to not do a thing, and that's a horrible goal. It doesn't say what you would do instead. So even with like, I mean, this ties perfectly with some of the OCD stuff that we've been talking about. Of it's not about not doing the thing; it's about replacing it with something else. And even if that replacing it, even if it is, so if I'm sitting on the couch and I'm gonna get up and go get some ice cream, and somebody says, "Well, don't do that don't eat the ice cream." What people don't realize is there's a series of micro decisions between you and grabbing the ice cream. You don't just all of a sudden go ice cream and it's in your mouth. You have to stand up, walk over, open the door, pull the ice cream out, take the cap off, nuke it in the microwave if you're like me, take a spoon out, put the spoon in, lift the spoon to your mouth, put your lips over the spoon, and swallow the ice cream. That's 11 steps that I just had between you on the couch and you on in the freezer. And people will say, well, that's an inevitable sequence of events. And it's not. Every single one of those moments is an opportunity to do something else instead. So if you're at step 1 where you're sitting on the couch and you're thinking, I want to go get some ice cream, you have an option to stand up or continue sitting. Now, if you're really early on in the process and you say, well, I'm going to continue sitting, you've just completely stopped the entire process, right? You've replaced getting up to go toward this freezer with sitting on the couch. And it's an important reframe for people to have, that you choose the alternative behavior, which is I sit on the couch. Now, if you stand up, now you're presented with another choice. Do I sit back down or do I walk toward the freezer? You could at any time choose to sit back down on the couch. Sometimes people get into this real like cognitive spiral of like, once I've stood up, here we go. And that's not true. You could sit down. Now, a person might say, well, I stood up and I walked toward the freezer and I'm now standing at the freezer. Well, you could open the freezer, or the alternative behavior might be turn around and walk back to the couch. And I could go on and on. I think you get the point. So it's a series of micro decisions that happens where, even when a person's acting on a compulsion, the alternative behavior to acting on the impulse has to be defined, which is what you're talking about. Like, do I look at the software manual while I'm not actually engaging with the program? Because yes, in a lot of ways, that is what we have to do. We have to say, like, what are you going to do? What are you going to commit to doing instead of what you usually do when the intrusive thought comes through? And then you have to sort of make the commitment with yourself and then act upon that when you do it. And it is a little bit of a trial and error. It's not something that gets, where I have the end all be all treatment plan for how OCD works. But it is something that, like, as we start to think about it in a meta sense like that, it starts to make more sense. It also helps people, again, see their level of accountability and control. At any point, you could turn around and sit down. At any point, you could continue to walk into the living room. You can, even if you're feeling anxious, you can still walk to the living room. Like, there's nothing preventing your legs from moving. You know how to move your legs, assuming you're a person who's of able body. You can move your legs. Moving your legs is completely mutually exclusive to the anxiety you experience relative to the security of your house or your desire to eat ice cream. And so if you can focus on that as the method, the locus of control, is to use a technical term, that locus of control to say, I can move my legs in a different direction. That's where I have the agency. I can't control the anxiety, can't control the intrusive thoughts, can't control the compulsion itself, can control where my legs go. That's kind of where I'm trying to usually focus with people when we're having conversations like this.
That makes a lot of sense. I smiled because, like, the idea of locus of control. My therapist just brought that up yesterday for the first time. He said in the same way you do it. It's like, to use a technical term. I was like, oh, okay, interesting. I really like the idea of saying not to do something. The instant you said that, I was like, oh, I know where this is going, just because in music, that's exactly it. So you play a wrong note, and I've said this, if you guys have been paying attention on stream, it's Pat since being here, whenever I'm practicing stuff, you can't just say don't do that, because, like, okay, third finger, like, missed. Like, where did it miss? Like, if you say don't do that, every other place but that one behavior, that one action you want, is also wrong. And if you just leave it up to your finger to randomly find the right one, you have the lowest possible chance of getting it to where you want to be. So instead of, like, don't do this, you have to focus your attention on where you want it to go instead of where you want it to not go. So I guess that's that type of, like, behavior control, that, like, replacing of behavior would be the same in this sense. I wonder.
So I have another. Yeah. I have another, like, random. I'll do another little exercise that'll be fun for chat and for me and hopefully for you. Okay, so I do not want to pick up my mouse and show you what kind of mouse I have. Okay, so I'm not going to pick up my mouse. I'm not going to draw attention to my mouse on stream. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you do not want me to make sure that I draw attention to my mouse and make sure that I don't pick up my mouse and draw attention to my mouse on the stream. I'm not going to pick it up.
Don't wait. Yes. I mean, sure, it's fine.
Okay. So I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to pick up my mouse and show it to you at all. Like, I don't even want to think about my mouse while we're talking about, because we're supposed to be talking about mental health, and I really want to make sure we don't talk about my mouse.
What kind of mouse do you have?
What's happening right now? Yeah. We're talking about my mouse. Which is the point. Like when people spend time thinking about the thing that they don't want to be thinking about, you're giving energy to it.
Mm,
So if you're saying to yourself, I don't want to go get the ice cream, I don't want to lock the door, I don't want to screw up this relationship engagement by saying certain thing, what you're actually cognitively reinforcing is the thing itself. You are imagining moving to the freezer. You are imagining picking up the mouse and showing it on stream. You are giving that energy. And so this is what I talk about with like how we respond to our intrusive thoughts is to go, okay, cool. Like, so I want to show my mouse on stream, but I'm going to go ahead and focus to the fact that like, I want to focus on Schnapp. I want to focus on the conversation that we're having right now. I want to focus on what it is that you have to say. That's more important to me than showing my mouse on stream. So I'm no longer going to speak about it and I'm going to focus on what it is that you're saying. If the desire to show my mouse again shows up, then I'm going to go ahead and just notice it and I'm going to continue to engage and focus on what I can focus on. So that's sort of the reasoning why we have that. I mean, that music example is a beautiful example. Yeah, don't play a D flat. What are you thinking about? A D flat. Don't think about the pink elephant. Everybody's thinking about the pink elephant. So we're giving the energy to the thing. You have to replace it. And that's a hard thing for people to do because we somehow, I don't know how we ever got to this point, but somehow all of us have gotten to a point where we define our goals by what we don't want them to be as opposed to what we want them to be.
I mean, in a certain sense, like that makes sense, at least as a starting point, where it's like recognizing that something is a problem. And the first thing, I guess it's easier. I'm just trying to think about it. I guess it's easier perhaps to be like, well, let's not do that before you can actually find a replacement thing. And perhaps the danger thing, I'm assuming is just like, right, that would just be automatic and we wouldn't even think about it. It's like danger. It's like anything but that.
Yep.
It's
Yes,
just,
exactly right.
Not that. Let's just,
Not the tiger. Yeah.
when it comes
but
to
I'm going to jump into the thorn bush off the cliff instead.
Yeah. When it, well, I mean, I guess we actually see that. I mean, who's like animal videos and even people too, like it's scared and like do some crazy behavior and maybe like, I mean, I've seen cats get scared and slip around and then fall and like something else bad happens because they get like scared by a cucumber or a loud noise or something like that.
That's exactly right.
I guess it becomes, so then, okay, so this is I guess like the next step in terms of maybe some sort of complexity is like the physical action, whether it's the door locking or the note. That seems to be easier for me to pinpoint and be like, okay, I'll put my finger here or something because I know what the note is. I know what I physically want to do. It seems to get even more complex and cloudy and weird. And it's like, well, now when you start thinking these things, it's like, what do you replace that like thinking behavior with? Or something like that. It's not so easy for me to know what the right thought is in that moment.
So what it would specifically be for you, obviously I can't go into, but that's obviously something that you and your therapist can figure out. But what I will say in a general sense, which may be a helpful template, is like for kind of how you would converse about this with him is it's going to sound a little bit hokey, but compassion's a big one. So a lot of times when a person experiences something that's intrusive, they've already been conditioned into understanding what the implications of this is. Like you could spend the whole 3 hours of us talking about exactly what's going to happen when this happens because it's happened so many times that you basically can anticipate it, right? So it becomes a foregone conclusion in that way. So instead, what we really want to help a person do is create a frame or a narrative that is focused on acknowledging, appreciating, and then holding accountable the compulsions themselves. So it's a matter of like the door lock. What we're talking about is a person's really their inability in this instance to reassure themselves in this moment, that the anxiety itself doesn't go away because either they don't trust their own voice. There are voices in their past that have contributed to the sense that they can't believe what it is that they have to say, or that they're playing out some kind of legacy on behalf of other people. There's all sorts of hypotheses for why these things happen. But what we want to do is like person locks the door, walks away, starts to feel the anxiety, you want to actually self-soothe in that moment. A lot of people do not have a good template for self-soothing. A lot of people will tell you, like, I don't know how to do that. I have no idea what that would even remotely sound like. Some people are lucky enough to have like an internalized object of a parent or a guardian or somebody who was really warm and accepting and held their emotions well, so they can kind of draw upon that. But ultimately, like, we want ourselves to be in a space where you walk away, you feel the anxiety, intrusive thought comes in, and you can meet that with, okay, this makes sense. I know why this is here. It's here to protect me, but I'm only going to check the door if I want to. I'm only going to attend to this thought if I want to, not if I have to. And one of the big separations we make is doing things because you've decided that you want to do that versus doing it because you feel like you have to do it. And OCD is loaded with have tos. I have to attend to this conversation. I have to fight this. I have to do this. I have to make sure I do this. I have to, I have to. Versus, well, do you want to? And initially, a person will say, yeah, of course I want to. And they go, wait a minute. No, I don't. Like, it's fucking miserable when I go to do it for a second time. And like, I don't want to focus on this. I don't want to give this thought all this attention. And we say, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Well, we need to meet you and yourself with a level of compassion. We need to have a narrative that's a little bit more in your best interest. This isn't happening because you're effed up. This isn't happening because you're crazy. This isn't happening because I'm out of control. This is happening because I'm just worried about something, and I have the ability to determine how I act upon this worry, and thus I'm going to engage with it in this way that I've worked through with a professional that has been able to help me create that treatment plan for how we relog it when the time comes, when it happens. So it's that it's the internal process. The intrusive thoughts are a lot harder to navigate through and separate and categorize and respond to than like changing a behavior it is. But if you look at your internal process, and I say this to everybody here, if you look at your internal process and the internal conversation you have with yourself as a, like, if you think about it in physical terms, the interaction itself becomes a behavior. Like, the way that I'm talking to you right now is behavior. The way you talk to me is behavior. The way you interpret what I say is one thing, but how you respond to it, if you choose to ask a question, if you choose to provide an explanation, if you choose to read a question from chat, if you choose to, I don't know, look to see how your guitar behind you is doing, those are all choices that you make relative to this moment. And the more we can focus on it in that way and see even an internal process as having some abstract behavioral tinge to it, that can sometimes help us think about how we might rework that conversation in our own minds.
I know for myself, and I know for other people too, who've said, I think there's someone in here who I was in their stream, and they mentioned this, that people like them and like me are able to be super compassionate to others and really forgiving to others, and incredibly brutal to themselves. When it comes to like the music thing, when I see people like make mistakes, I'm like, I don't care. I don't think anything poorly of them, and I want to be like, it's
Yep.
all right and stuff. But when it's me, it's like all of a sudden I'm like off. I am awful. Like, I treat myself terribly, and it's really difficult to stop that sort of thing, especially because I end up feeling like, well, I deserve that. It's like you're worthless. Like you're worthless.
Yeah.
So like you it doesn't, like, you don't matter. None of this stuff matters. Like, in fact, you should feel this way about something. It's something that's I've been trying to do. Well, actually, not try. I have been doing the past week because I like really got pushed to like a breaking point. I was so upset, and I was like pleading to the air, to like to myself, yeah, to just like it was like this idea of like, leave me, like, just like, please leave me alone. And this is something I'd written. Someone mentioned this. I'd written a song, and it was about just that. It was like acknowledging that this thing has a function, um, but it's not like pushing it away, but it's like, no, you're like, you're sort of, you're there for a reason, but you're now at this point like making things worse. And the thing that happened, I'm trying to sort of break myself out of this cycle, because I don't know if it's like this for other people. I'd imagine it's just kind of like this for people in general, is that I feel like we get in these loops or these cycles or patterns, and it takes some sort of external force to be knocked out of it. Um, and so I was like incredibly upset, more upset than I had been. I can't even remember. And like so I like went up to my room and I saw a picture of myself as like a little kid, and I instantly felt terrible. And I mean, like, I started to like look at this picture and like thinking about, instead of saying those words to me, it was like, imagine like just going to like a little kid who's like 2 years old and being like, you piece of shit, you're worthless, you suck, you're ugly, you look terrible, no one's like, and I was like, oh my god, it's like borderline evil. um and it's like not fair to that to like that little kid. And so what I've like been trying to do is keep that like picture around, to have like a physical reminder, because like it's I don't seem to be able to have the control of that. It's like maybe this thing can be part of take advantage where I have control, right? So it's like, okay, if I do this thing, I'm going to think these thoughts or whatever. It's like, perhaps I can add in this new lines of code or something like this to stop this pattern each time it happens. It's like this thing will be in, like, I even have it right now. There's just like a picture right there. Like, I'll have this right now. And like, when this starts to happen, I won't be able to help because it's in my view. Like these things will now be redirected. Like, instead of having the thoughts go like initially inward towards whatever the hell I am, it's like to like this other place over and over. And I'm hoping that like it's one of the steps in doing something to like be more compassionate, because the idea of just being more compassionate without anything else changing hasn't worked,
Yeah.
for as long as I've tried it. Because I feel like a lot of us are perhaps like, we may be adults and like mature, but it seems like that means that we're invincible and immune to words and feelings. Like, now we're like these adults who are just these like super stoic, whatever, like nothing
Yep.
hurts them. It's like, but if you insult an adult or something, like, I think it's asking a little too much to ask people to be totally just immune to any sort of negative actions or words or feelings and stuff like that. Because we don't do that with kids. We're like, it's like,
Or if you
I feel
do
like
it, kids are pretty evil.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or at least or at least what you're trying to do is out of whack. Because what I'd have to imagine for myself, and again, this is through a lot of different thinking, is like receiving that stuff, that sort of things. Maybe not, it's maybe not specifically you suck and you're not good enough, but like having really harsh things said to you, and like expectations and all that stuff, where the very next logical step is that you're not good enough. So like, you don't have to
Yeah.
say you're not good enough to be like, well, if you don't do this thing, it's not good enough. It's like, well, I didn't do that thing, so I must not be good enough. Like, that's really
Yeah,
easy.
right.
That's really easy for a person to do. So I don't know if anyone else, that was just something I felt like I should bring up, or if anyone else struggles with that sort of thing. I've always struggled with like just being more compassionate and being like, just treat yourself better. It has just not worked.
It's hard. I love that you shared that story about finding the picture of yourself as a kid, because I was legitimately going to tell you before you said that story that one of the most common interventions that I use with people when they're struggling with self-criticism is to imagine themselves as a kid. and to picture themselves saying that stuff to them as a kid, or not even themselves, or to just a kid. And 100% of the time, pretty much, a person will go, "Oh, well, I would never say that to a kid." And you go, "Yeah, well, the thing we have to remember is we as adults are big kids.
Mm.
Kids aren't little adults. We tend to treat kids like they're little adults. They're not. Kids are kids. We're just big kids. We have the same stupid drama. We have the same emotions. We have the same needs that kids have. We just do everything we can as adults to stuff that out of people. But we've got them. We're just big kids, so it does hurt. It is hard. The thing about self-criticism, and I say this to really everybody in chat, because I saw, as you were telling that story, a lot of people in chat were saying, "Oh my God, this is totally me. I'm my own worst critic. I'm all these sorts of things." One, you're a person too, and I know that that's just a very like surface level like thing. Like, we're all deserving of compassion and patience. When people are excessively harsh to themselves, as a therapist, and somebody who studied development, one of the things that I immediately go to is, we don't come out into this world critical. We don't know what criticism is. We don't have an understanding enough of the world to be judgmental about whether something is good enough, or whether something is, allows us to belong, or whatever it is. When we're kids and when we're teenagers, even into adulthood, the way we learn whether things are acceptable or not is through the direction and the conditioning of people that we care about and the environment that we're in. So as long as I continue to do X thing, my parents or guardians still take care of me. Or I've been told that if I do this, this makes me lovable because I get energy when this happens. And kids don't differentiate good energy from bad energy. The only thing that kids want is just energy in whatever capacity. So what they do is they learn, these are the things I do that get me energy, and these are the things that they don't. And lack of energy from a parent is often perceived as punishment. So if a kid's really proud of a piece of their artwork that they did, and they're going up to their parent and they're like, "Look what I did, look what I did. I'm so proud of what I drew." And the parent's just like, "Yeah, whatever," or they're busy, or they don't give any energy to it. The kid, and then they go over to the table. The kid's now been punished for sharing something they're proud of, but also, if the kid goes over to the table and then they spill the paint on the carpet, and then the parent comes running over and gives them a whole bunch of energy for the fact that they spilled paint on the carpet, that kid has just learned, I get energy from my parent when I screw up, not when I do something that I'm proud of. And that becomes, over time, with patterns, becomes an ingrained sense of expectations that we carry into adulthood. So I say all of this because when we get into adulthood and we start to become really harsh critics to ourselves, what I often try to open a conversation up with people on is, where did you learn this? Where did you learn to say to yourself in this moment something that harsh? What is it that you're trying to accomplish by saying that? Where do you belong? Who in your family would agree with you when you say these harsh things about yourself? Who would be sitting there going, "Yeah, you had better say that about yourself"? Or who would go like, "Yeah, it makes sense why you say that, because yeah, that expectation is what I have." We learn these things. Sometimes people will say, "Oh God, I had a teacher that I really looked up to that used to just be really harsh with me," or "I had a coach that was really harsh," or my parents would say to me all the time, if I got 98% on a test, the first thing my parent would say is, "Well, where's the other 2%?"
Mm.
And so now that creates an internal expectation. We can only use what we've gotten. If you don't have a template for how people hold you in reinforcing the things that you do that are desirable, you learn what's desirable and what's not, and you create and you hold those expectations, because that's how you've been motivated and conditioned throughout your entire life to survive within the system that you're a part of. And so as an adult, sometimes that self-criticism that we have, that really harsh dialogue, is a family legacy or a system legacy. I carry that on behalf of other people who have taught me that this is how I have to talk about myself in order to meet X standard that then allows me to receive whatever praise or acknowledgement or love or belonging that I long for as a human being. And once people can sometimes make that separation and sort of have an understanding of whose narratives they're carrying, they start to be able to move into a space where they can create some of their own. See that when you're telling yourself this really critical thing, and I've gone through this myself. I'm not just talking like on my pedestal here. I've gone through this myself. When you realize where these come from, you can say like, you know what, mom, dad, cousin, coach, I don't deserve to hear that. That's not fair. It didn't make sense then. It doesn't make sense now. It doesn't motivate me. That's not the type of rhetoric I want to have to attend to in order to belong. And this is an internal thing that happens. You're
Mm.
not actually saying this to the person. Sometimes we do as family therapists, but we do this internally. It's like setting a real strong boundary and reestablishing a hierarchy in our internal system that says, I don't have to listen to that shit. I matter even if I do mess up a note. I matter even if I am a little bit awkward at a party. It's not because I'm not going to be cast out. I'm still a person that's worthy of validation, that's able to make mistakes, that deserves the same kind of patience that I might have for somebody else. Because oftentimes, when a person's really self critical, but not critical to others, it's because they're trying to emulate what they wish they would have had for themselves without realizing that they can create that environment for themselves once they hold the narratives that they are currently carrying accountable to who has pushed them into their brain. And so, even if I'm working individually with people, I'm always thinking about their wider system and the way that it influenced them to create the expectations that they have. Because as an adult, you have the luxury of creating your own expectations, as hard as it may be.
That makes sense, and I know for myself because I've been trying to figure this stuff out for so long, and even just okay, so it's like okay, knowing, trying to figure out where this stuff comes from. I feel like at this point, at least for myself, I have a decent understanding on where all these things have come from, and it's just very difficult to sort of take the next steps. Like major factors. I was talking about the perfection thing. It's like it's clearly something that's been explicitly ingrained as baseline is perfection.
Mm-hmm.
You can never be perfect, so therefore you're always underneath perfection. If perfection equals validation, you're never going to be good enough unless you're perfect. And even then, that's not you excelling, that's just to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just not even okay unless you're at this impossible high level of something. I've had to also think about, and like that's not fair. And like I can acknowledge that it's still, at least for me, isn't like, oh, okay, now that I know that, I'll just go along my way, and I don't have perfectionist like tendencies. That's not the case. Another thing I've noticed is like, okay, so how do I, with the OCD and with the anxiety and the anger and stuff like that, it's like, okay, so what do I see myself doing? It's like, well, breaking things. Okay, so why that? And lots of people have said that, and even I've tried this a long time ago. It's like just hit a punching bag or something if you don't want to break things. And it's like it took me a long time to understand why that didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, what I noticed were two things. I wanted the things that were very satisfying when like out of control were the thing making a loud noise and the thing being destroyed. So like the punching bag can make kind of a loud noise, but it won't be destroyed. And I started to like get notice this sort of weird pleasure kind of. It's not really pleasure how we think about it, but it's like
Yeah.
it seems to satisfy the thing to have something broken and almost look at like this destruction in front of me, and it's like, well, this doesn't make any sense, but it's like it's gotta make sense in some way. Um,
When I've seen it before, it's control. I mean, when people are held to impossible standards, they often feel a loss of control. Like perfection is, I say this on my stream all the time. Perfection's a horrifically terrible goal. It is truly awful because even perfection is subjective. Like even you could ask one person is something perfect and they would say yes. You ask another person and they would say that it isn't. And there is no such thing as an objective perfect. And so when people try to hold themselves to that standard, it is this horrible space of like it's an unrealistic standard and I feel powerless against it because if that's been something that's been reinforced by the people and system I care about as a standard that I somehow have to hit, it sometimes people will find whatever they can to exert a level of control. or to even exert a level of control that leads to something being imperfect. Because for so many people, like if you break something, now it's no longer a perfect form of whatever it is. If I took this glass and threw it on the desk and shattered, it no longer holds water. And I can look at that and say that lack of perfection in that moment is because I controlled it. I made that be imperfect. And I'm held to a standard where I don't get to control whether I'm imperfect because I'm inherently imperfect because of how unrealistic this goal is. I'm not saying this is what's going on for you, but in my own experience, I see this a lot where we want to try to figure out how to exert influence on things that we don't consider as being influenceable. And people will sometimes find these very like out of left field, sometimes it seems, means to try to exert that control and gain that semblance of like, I actually can influence this in some way and I'm going to, and I feel better as a result.
That makes sense. I think for me, as far as if I'm like um, listening to myself as much as possible, like being as honest with myself as possible, and like really trying to think about these things, I'd imagine for me that the ultimate goal, whether I like it or not, or want it to be or not, or something like that, is some sort of attention, because noise brings attention, seeing a total mess somewhere brings attention. So if like doing something and not achieving perfection doesn't bring any sort of attention and this thing does, then it's like that's the behavior learned in order to get some
Hmm.
intention. So then the next thing comes up, which even gets to one of these things which I've always noticed. So it's like, I've noticed you only talk about what doesn't work, what does help you. And it's like, I don't know. It seems like nothing. That's the best thing in the moment, at least, that I've been able to do to help, because that
Hmm.
seems to be the only thing that works aside from something else. And this is like super important. And it's like avoiding the thing that gets someone upset in the first place. And this can get really tricky, because if everything I find myself, especially right now, where like everything seems to be a possible trigger for these sort of like feelings and behaviors and stuff, but totally uh, pushing everything away does not seem healthy. And I know for like the goals I have, it's definitely not good. Like the social media stuff, I see other people, these places I'm supposed to find myself, like on Twitch and Twitter, YouTube, whatever social media things, I need to be connected at least to some degree with that. But those are also the places that can set off these feelings, because I just see people who like do better than me, and it makes me feel terrible about myself. So it's like there's kind of two things there. Where like I don't even know what like really how to go about finding a replacement behavior, or like, because I've tried different things and it seems like breaking stuff is the only satisfying thing. But also,
Yeah.
um, I
Yeah.
have been, as I've mentioned to some people, I feel bad, but like I have not been in people's streams a bunch, not reacting, like not interacting with things, because like I just can't do it for myself. It seems to be the only thing I can think of right now that makes things a little better, is to just like ignore stuff. But then it makes that's only temporarily like gonna work. Um,
Well, as it relates to, I mean, as it relates to anxiety, there are two things that make anxiety worse over time because it passively reinforces that the locus of the anxiety has significant emotional power over a person. And those two things are avoidance and excessive reassurance seeking. So what happens is we look at this from like a behavioral perspective. And again, this isn't a commentary on you specifically, but your example is a great way to like sort of like filter into this. Is let's take social media for example. I hate Twitter. I'm vocal about that on my stream all the time.
I
Twitter
thought you were gonna
has
say on Twitter. I was like that.
yeah, no, I mean I hate Twitter.
Vocal on Twitter about how.
My stream knows this. I use Twitter. I've gotten I've gotten followers via Twitter. So like Twitter's this weird dissonance for me because I despise the platform, but it's also helpful as I'm
Yeah, that's
talking about, right? Like it's like, oh my God. So the thing about it is, if let's say Twitter in this instance is something that I experience a significant amount of anxiety relative to, and it stirs up a whole bunch of shit. If I avoid using Twitter because it seems like I have to stay away from this thing. Like it's just I can't. And I've been here in some instances where it's like I can't handle it. I can't handle what people might say. I can't handle the platform itself, what I might read, stuff getting shoved my way. It's just gonna the avoidance of that actually reinforces that that is the thing that has that kind of power over you. That if I access Twitter, I'm slave to whatever emotional experience it's going to elicit from me, that it's going to shove a bunch of stuff in my face, and I don't have any power against that. And people experience this with all sorts of things, all sorts. This is where procrastination comes from. Everything. Procrastination is just anxiety management. It's all it is. So we avoid. When we avoid, it creates a mythos about the thing and us in relation to that thing. That this is, say, it's a thing that's going to expose how terrible I am. It's a thing that's going to expose how much better other people are than me. And it becomes true when it becomes an abstract process in our head, which is to say, like, well, now it's not about, well, it could expose these things. It becomes it will expose these things. And thus, I really have to stay away from it because if I go there, it will. And now we're into sort of like unrealistic territory because we don't know that to be true. It's pretty black and white. It's kind of jumping to a conclusion. We all do this. And so the more we avoid, the bigger that mythos becomes. The more we avoid, the more the anxiety exists. And then it becomes this thing where it's like, well, now I'm never going to jump into Twitter because now it's become this something that I just absolutely can never do. And so we have to reestablish for ourselves with the things that we might be avoiding. Is this something that actually legitimately is within, like, is for my well-being to avoid? Like, can I objectively look at this as best I can and say, do I really need to be on, for me, for example, Facebook? No, I hate Facebook. It's terrible. I will never be on it ever again. And for me, it's not detrimental. It's not something that actually is, I don't experience anxiety related to Facebook. I just don't like it. Twitter, on the other hand, is something where, I sort of have to look at it and go, well, it's something that is useful for me. It reaches people in a way that I normally can't reach people. So there is utility to me being on Twitter, so long as there are certain conditions on Twitter that I can avoid certain information coming my way. And so I'm going to deal with a little bit of the anxiety associated with going into it and then exert what control I have over it. And that's come in the form of I log into Twitter twice a week. Unless there's something special like this happening. I preload all my videos on Monday. And then I check to see how they're doing, usually on Thursday or Friday. And that's it. And I sort of have set boundaries with myself for how I use that. So it allows me to move through it in a way that is like, I experience a little bit of the anxiety associated with it, but I also get to exert influence. And it's made me a little bit more comfortable with the platform over time. So when we avoid, we have to be really careful to make sure it's not reinforcing anxiety, especially if it's something that's actually in our best interest to do. Whether Twitter's in your best interest to do is not, for me to decide, but it's just kind of the illustrative thing. So the other thing, the second one, is excessive reassurance seeking, which people run into all the time, which is where they, instead of engaging in a level of self-reassurance about a thing that they're anxious about, they will seek that reassurance from others. And they will basically hang their hat on the mitigation of their anxiety on other people's ability to reassure them that they're okay. So it might come in the form of like a person, like if I made a post, if I put one of my tidbit clips up on Twitter and I'm like unsure about it and I'm feeling really anxious about how it's going to be perceived, if I reach out to like everybody I possibly can, I'm like, did I do okay? How was that? Is that clip okay? Did that offend anybody? How's everybody doing? If people don't like the tweet, I go, is it because you didn't see it? Is it because you didn't like it? And the person goes, no, it's okay, Ryan. Like it's fine. Like it's not that I didn't like it. It was a great post. It's good. And I'm like, oh, okay, thank God. And then I go to somebody else because I'm trying to gather all these stories that basically reinforce for me that my anxiety is ridiculous and that I should be fine. That also reinforces anxiety because it's reinforcing that only other people can make my anxiety go away, not me. And that then sometimes contributes to a level of avoidance as well. And so when I'm working with severe debilitating anxiety and OCD, we're really trying to work to push people into a space where if you're distracting yourself or removing yourself from a thing, Is it on your terms, or is it anxiety driven? Is it compulsive versus is it intentional? And really trying to kind of reconnect a person with their ability to navigate those spaces, see where they have influence, and then hold accountable where they don't have influence. And what can we accept? What do we hold accountable? What do we avoid? And it becomes a really like complex process of trying to navigate that for a specific person because we all have anxiety in different spaces.
Mm. I like the Twitter example thing, and I have something where I could do that. You can like schedule out when things, you can schedule out when things will be posted. And I guess that gives you sort of like the best of both worlds. So you're not just constantly on the platform, but you also get to use it in the way it can be helpful in terms of. And I knew both those things that you were just talking about, which is like general procrastination or avoidance, and also excessive reassurance seeking. That happens in all sorts of ways. It happens on stream too, or like even on stream, it happens in multiple forms, which is like seeking reassurance through sheer number of like people watching, through activity in chat. I start to panic when I see chat not moving for like a particular amount of time, and it just leads to like that starts that same chain of thoughts that was like that got started by like making a mistake. And so even though I know that there could be people there that like, it doesn't speak to my self-worth or something like that, it still seems to have that effect. And I'm not really sure how to go about that one specifically. Like the Twitter one does have sort of an answer, and it's like, plan those things out and have them scheduled to be put out. The chat one is different. I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. Like, I can't imagine anyone would like their chat to be slow. Like, I actually hate having tons of subscribers and followers and viewers and active chat. I wish my community was dead. Like, that's not like, I don't mean like
Chat,
literally.
can you please slow it down?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, well, actually, kind of. I mean, people put on slow stuff and subscribe, but with that said, that's not what either of us are talking about.
Right.
So that's man, that one's tough, and I even know that what I'm sort of like what I'm like asking from myself and others is like not fair. It's not reasonable. Like, it's not fair for any one person to be here like, you must be chatting all the time and saying hey to these people or moderating this thing, and if not, like, you're a bad person or something like that. That's not okay. But I still get this feeling of like needing this like external validation all the time.
Yeah. And I see that sometimes, like, and again, not just for you. I've been here. I've been there too. I mean, I still remember the days where I'd log on and had nobody watching me, and like just how that feels. You probably were there at some point too when you first start, right? Like, we all have to go through that. And the thing that so I'm gonna actually it's something I didn't share at the very beginning, but I'll share now is I worked on a suicide hotline for 3 years. When I was in undergrad, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, if you were anywhere in certain regions of Indiana and Illinois, if you called that any time between midnight and 8 a.m., you talked to me. And one of the things I learned in that experience that has carried into some of the work that I do with people around some of what you're talking about, and even in my own life, is accountability and where we locate accountability. And I think a lot of us have a tendency, particularly in this type of space as streamer, I think anybody in chat who's a streamer will know exactly what we're talking about here. There is a tendency for us to over personalize our accountability and responsibility in a given situation to a point where we will take factors that are truly out of our control, that have completely alternative explanations for why they are that they're happening the way that they are, and we will filter it through our own ego. Where, like, I might say, I remember one time I had like maybe like 2 people in chat and neither people were talking, and I thought to myself, are these people not talking because I'm uninteresting? And is it because of something I'm doing? Did I say something? Is the game I'm playing something they don't like?
And we get into all these questions, right? Like it must be me. That's the reason why these things are happening. And we do that, I think, because we have our brain gets into a space where we think if it is us, then we have influence over it. If it is what I'm doing, if it is that I played a wrong note on the guitar, it means that I can go play a right note next time, and that will actually change this, and people will be willing to talk. If I bring more interesting content and answer questions more effectively, people will be more compelled to talk to me. That it's my fault that these things are happening, which is an assumption that I think, particularly in a context like Twitch, sometimes it's easier for us to make because we're not actually interfacing with people. People could be doing whatever. And so why I brought up the suicide hotline thing is there used to be this sense that like if a person wasn't doing okay, or if like the phone call ended and we weren't sure how they were doing, we had to learn really quickly that like it's not my responsibility to actually prevent a person from hurting themselves. I am not accountable for the decisions that that person makes. I'm only accountable for showing up in the way that I am to the best of my ability. And if I received feedback from people that part of the reason they didn't want to continue a call or that they didn't want to call the crisis center is because I was the one answering and there were things that I were doing, then I'm totally open to that feedback. If somebody in chat is willing to say to me, hey man, I'm not sure I really want to watch your stream anymore because you've been doing this thing or you've been playing this game, that gives me something very tangible. I can say like, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. And then I can make a decision of what I want to do with that. We sort of are in a position to have to put people into a space where we allow them to be responsible for why it is that they're interacting the way that they are, and to open ourselves to the idea that the explanation may have absolutely nothing to do with us at all. Now, that doesn't change the emotional experience of that until we have a significant amount of practice. I still, anytime I got a call on the suicide hotline or anytime my chat dies, because my chat dies too, I still have the initial burst of, oh my God, is this me? Did I screw this up somehow? And that is, the distinction is that's a possibility, but also other things are possible too. And then that gets us back into the dissonance that I was talking about a little bit earlier, where it could potentially be one of these two things. And my uncertainty related to it means that my brain's going to be compelled to draw a conclusion, and so that I can put it in a box and do something with it. And it's easier for us to say it's my fault, because then we also have a sense of control in that process, and we move forward with this idea that it's our fault instead of the possibility that it is, but it's also possible that it isn't. And again, it brings me back to the distress tolerance of the anxiety it takes to sit within that gray area for a little bit, because we perceive it as risk, even though it's not actually a risk.
And that makes sense. And I think this is what John is asking about. I've always seen that as another good mechanism gone haywire. Because like you said, if that mechanism wasn't there at all, then you wouldn't be able to it'd be very difficult to grow and make changes, because you'd never see anything wrong in anything you're ever doing. And so you don't grow.
Correct.
But if everything seems like it's wrong, or if the response to it is actually more destructive than constructive, then that also makes things worse. And that's where I tend to find myself, even when I'm aware of it, I try to listen to things that people have told me, things like, oh, we're just listening, or I actually prefer to listen without talking in chat, and that actually helps me enjoy it more, and we're just quiet because we're listening and stuff like that. It's so difficult to have, because the thoughts still automatically come up without me even trying to do it, and then talking them away doesn't work. By that time it's already too late. So I'm not, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, I just go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was going to say, part of me thinks that some increased level of success will help that, but it's hard, because for one, that part of that instinctively feels right, but also wrong. For one, it seems right because it's oh, well, if these things seem to be the triggers, and those aren't there anymore, it should help, right? But then another part of me wants to protect against that thinking of oh, if only this happens, things will be better. And so there's, I'm trying to protect against finding these simple or like external solutions to something that seems to be an internal issue. Um,
Well, I think one of the things that helps spur that process on and gets lost within the weeds of how, as you know, debilitating some of this process can be internally is where do we pay attention to and give energy to data, which is, and OCD has a way of really showing up and trying to override this. I'm sure you'll probably agree as I explain this, but like it's very easy when chat's flowing, things are going well. Like I know for me, it's like when there's good questions and we're flowing and the game's going well and like you're just kind of like in the zone. But it's really easy to look at that and not really pay much mind to it, to just kind of let it go as it's happening, because in a lot of ways, that's what we expect is like that I'm going to stream and it's going to go well. And one of the things that I think is really important, and I try to help people get into a space of doing, is like you have to think about it as weight. That if there's something that you're going to be hard on yourself for, if it's not going the way you want it to, so like say you're going to throw 5 pounds on, if nobody in chat is chatting, if the chat's dead, I missed a few notes, and I just am not on my game today. If that's going to go 5 pounds there in terms of how much attention is paid to that, I'm talking to myself here too. When things are clicking, we're hitting right notes, I'm answering questions, chat's flying, we're in the zone, we get a couple awesome raids, we got some new people coming in, there's subs, there's like all this support for the stream, and we're in the zone. That also has to get 5 pounds. And we have this tendency to kind of be like 5 pounds over here and maybe like a couple ounces over here.
Yep.
Like I'm not going to give this as much. And people, we have to balance that scale. And it's like, so if it's going to be something that if you're only going to throw a couple cents on it when it's bad, you only throw a couple cents on it when it's good. It's one of those, like the things that are desirable for us deserve the amount of energy that we give them if they aren't going well. So if you play a song and you miss a note and you go, oh, and you spend like, a whole bunch of time thinking about how you messed up that note. And then you go and you play that song again and you hit that note again. The fact that you hit that note deserves the amount of energy that it would have gotten if you missed it. And that's very hard. Again, for me, for anybody, that's very hard for us to do. But that's where us as therapists, where I step in, is to really help people through that process. So it might be like if a person in session has an obsessive thought come in and then they actually hold it at bay for a second and they re-engage in a different way, and they maybe like ask a curiosity-based question, or they do something that we would hope that they would do that's within their goal. I'm going to stop and go, we need to give that energy. I really want you to give yourself credit for that right now. And then sometimes they're like, no, that's really hard to do. It's like, no, if you give 5 pounds when it doesn't go, you're giving 5 pounds when it does go. I want to walk with you through that. I'm going to give you some compliments. I need you to do it too, because you deserve that energy. And it's laborious at first. And OCD does everything it can to try to tell you don't do that, because OCD is powerless against that and it knows it. And so anything you do or anything any of us does that goes against that, or against anxiety or against depression, those things have a way of trying to overcompensate for that and make us believe we can't do those things, when in reality, we absolutely can. And the more you recalibrate that autopilot, the more it gets ingrained, the more you have a new software manual where now you're operating from a more sophisticated level of code that makes it where it's no longer has to be this laborious, intentional process. It becomes automatic. But it's very easy for people to bail out of that. And I understand why they do. But it's a very like, the weight has to be equal. It's only fair to ourselves to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Bardic was saying that's something that no one really does correctly, I think, right? And like from my understanding is that is a natural human thing to weight
Yes.
things more heavily on the negative, again, most likely because of protecting from danger and also identifying mistakes. And I feel like for me, it's even like probably more extreme than normal for a few different reasons. And so any sort of tips or advice on that you have is definitely helpful. I mean, it seems like you already gave one, which is like, because I struggle even knowing that. I'll even be aware of it. It's like, man, I should I should be giving myself more credit for this. And like, I can think it, but I don't feel it. Like, it doesn't make me, it doesn't have the almost like physiological effects that the negative ones do, that are like, both of those are out of my control. So it's like, how do we get that to actually have the same automatic internal deep response? Because
I will answer that in 1 second. I'm going to use the restroom really quick.
Oh yeah, go for it. Go for
back.
it. Yeah. Over 500. Nice. Yeah, I said it at 100. We did that in like the first few minutes. You know, speaking speaking of trying to like set up for success and all that stuff, I was like so anxious that we'd set some goal, and even in as like this is almost like really selfish to like to do it this way. Like if we fail to meet the goal, then I would feel bad about myself, and I was like, oh God, let's not in the middle of raising money for charity get upset at not raising enough. So I appreciate you guys continuing to donate and help out. And thank you guys for interacting. I'm trying to both read the stuff, but also keep my attention. Keep my attention on what's going on, because there's just like a lot of stuff going on. But I'm basically seeing what you guys are typing, so we just can't keep responding to every single thing. So, but I think you guys realize that.
Yeah, I've been watching chat passively too, kind of like while we've been talking, and it's been pretty cool to kind of see the thoughts and stuff. I also I want to say again, I appreciate you bringing me on to do this. I'm really enjoying talking with you. So this has been, I can't believe we're already like 2 hours in.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Like, it's nice to be able to talk about these things in a sectioned off, focused, focused way. And there's so much to talk about, because I mean, there's like still this like list of questions and stuff and things people are asking about, and like we've hit a bunch of them, but there are so many that.
Well, the good news is this doesn't have to be the only time you and I talk.
I was thinking about that too. Yeah, there's no reason. I would in fact like to do these sorts of things just in general with lots of people more. And this is something I've been talking about on stream that I've always wanted, actually since before I even started streaming regularly. I talked with a friend of mine who like convinced me to stream, and like that night we kind of both like had some goals that we wanted to do, and one of the things, even initially, there were things like play music. Analyzing music was actually one of the initial things pre like first stream, and then also bringing people on and having conversations, and trying to direct that in a way that it's like focusing on that particular person's area of expertise. It's something I've always wanted to do, but I always, surprise, surprise, I've always felt like the stream wasn't at a level where I needed to do more before I could take these steps. Yeah. I feel with everything. It's why I didn't do any like charity stuff. I felt like the stream was never big enough. It's why I haven't reached out to any sponsor. I don't do so much stuff because I feel like it's not like at the level. And I know I need to not do that, but for so many reasons we've been talking about, it's like I still just feel that way, and I get really anxious thinking about it. Like, I was so anxious about the stream. I was excited, but like just anxious because a lot of the stuff is new. I've never done a fundraiser stuff. I've never had other people on the stream.
It works, dude. We're doing it.
It's crazy. I was scared. I was like the $100 one. I was scared because I didn't want to be like you. Because I don't know if anyone's done the Tiltify stuff. You go on the front page and it's like so and so has raised 1,200,000 something. That like literally, if you guys, I didn't make that number up. People are just like hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars on the front page of like Tiltify. So you're like, donation goal, $500,000. Like what are you doing? Like what am I basing it? Like this is crazy.
Man, it's so.
so and it was like, just to let you know, you can always increase the donation goal, but you can't lower it. I was like, oh my God, I will, then we'll make it low and move up from there. But so, I do appreciate everyone helping out with
That's
this
awesome.
because I I enjoy doing this stuff and I hope it's helpful. And a lot of these questions and stuff were, I wanted to sort of respectfully take advantage of the situation and try to make things better for myself and for everyone who watches the stream because this stuff definitely gets in the way. But there, I mean, other things. One of the things I did want to talk about that is,
Before you do that,
oh
though,
yeah,
before
what's
you
that?
do that, I want to answer your question from before I left to pee
Oh,
because
sorry, yeah, go for it.
it's a very important one. It was a really, really, really important question, which is why I wanted to be able to concentrate my way through it.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, so you had said, there's sort of these like things that, well, you even reiterated here at the other end where you're like, there's things that I want to do, and there's always this worry that it's kind of like not in the right place, or there's kind of like if a person re-engages in a like if they're going to reauthor their narrative, to use the kind of the technical term, right? Like if you're going to meet yourself with compassion or whatever, and people say, okay, well, that doesn't make me feel good the way that you said, right? Like I don't feel it when I say those things. That's what I would expect. That's what any therapist would expect in that moment, because you or anybody else in that moment is not conditioned for that response to have any meaning. It is something that if we form an expectation at the outset, and I avoid doing this when I'm working with people because we try to set a realistic expectation, is when you do these new things, if you meet these intrusive thoughts with something different and you engage with a level of compassion, you engage in the way that you would say that you want to engage with yourself around this stuff, you aren't going to feel anything other than anxiety when you do it. In fact, you actually, this is the rubber meets the road. Literally the rubber meets the road moment in therapy with people working through this stuff, especially anxiety. The rubber meets the road moment is you actually have to do these things while you're anxious. And every ounce of you is going to want to get away from doing that. Everything's going to tell you it's not going to work. I'm not going to feel it. It's not going to matter. It's not going to be good enough. It's not going to make a difference. Everything that's ever been told to you before, or anything you've ever told yourself about this, is that it is not going to work. And I, as the therapist in those moments, am deeply empathic toward that. Always like, yep, totally understandable. I'm with you. I don't disagree. Of course, it doesn't seem like it's going to work, because at first it's not going to feel any different. But the only way that we actually recalibrate an autopilot, particularly in the context of anxiety, is to do something different while the anxiety is there. We can't, it's one thing for us to talk about it and go like, okay, so next time that I feel anxiety, I'm going to say to myself, I'm worthy of love and this is fine. Okay, yeah, cool. You and I could talk about that forever. But when there's an actual moment where it's the moment when the spiral might happen, or the moment where a person might avoid or seek the reassurance, and we've come up with a script of what it would be that you would replace it with, which again is kind of the work between you and your therapist to do, but like, what would that script be? I, as the therapist in that moment and sitting with that person, am going to say, it's okay that you're anxious. The anxiety gets to be here. It makes total sense why it's here. We're going to do the new thing. You're going to say the new thing, even if you don't believe it. You do not need to believe it. But the very first thing we need to do is say it. You have to hear yourself say it. And the person, and you wouldn't believe, maybe you would, because maybe you've been here. I have always been fascinated by how hard it is for people to do that, because I will tell them to say it out loud. So, like, as a very basic example, I might have a person say, I deserve love. I am not a failure. I am working hard, and that matters. So let's say that's the narrative that a person has decided with me they want to be able to say to themselves. When they're in that moment of anxiety and I've hit them with some of the some of that little bit of reassurance of it's okay to be anxious, and I say, now we're going to say that out loud, even if they are reading it off of a piece of paper, people will stop. They will freeze. They will not say it. They will stay silent. And it is so hard for people to get into that. And that's where I, as a professional, am hanging in there going, I know this is hard. And the compulsions, the avoidance, all of it swoops in. They want to get as far away from it as they possibly can. They'll spend a bunch of time saying, I don't believe this. And I go, I know you don't believe it. You've got to say it. You know how to say the words. You know how to read. You do not have to believe it. You just need to hear yourself say it. And then they will inevitably end up saying it. And then when they do, all this shit swoops in. That's basically like, nope, 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 nope. Because all that is trying to get you back to a homeostasis that you're used to. Because entering that territory of saying something like that, despite being anxious, is brand new. It's not meeting the expectations that a person has at that moment. And that in and of itself facilitates anxiety. So it creates a positive feedback loop again. So we have to just continue to practice saying it. As it gets easier to say it when it happens, then we get into belief. Then we get into the reinforcement mechanisms beyond that of like, what are the punishing mechanisms that go into this where when you say it, it's hard to believe it. And we work through those things and we kind of detangle that. And we say, we're going to continue to say it. But as it becomes easier to say, and as a person sees the dividends that it pays as they do that, where there starts to be a reward for doing that, then it starts to recalibrate the emotional experience when a person goes to say that. But the anxiety is generally always going to be the input. We have to design the circuitry in such a way that it either mitigates that or connects it to a different emotional experience rather than amplifying the anxiety itself, which is what most of us do when we experience anxiety as an input to the circuit. So that's kind of my, like, how I wanted to make sure that I attended to that, because it's super important that I teach this to people. I do this for a living and I struggle with doing it myself. It's very hard to do.
And that's good too. That's good to hear too. So there's like a little extra weight to it too, because it's not just words. Like, yeah, just do this. I think it works. Like,
Yeah.
I don't do it all, but yeah, you should be doing this.
Yeah, right.
Like,
or maybe like it's just so easy for me to do.
Yeah.
Here I am, Mr. Therapist knows how to do that. No, it's really freaking hard to do.
And that's
Really
super, and you're right, it is really hard for me to do that. So it's hard for me to do that exact thing, even if it's like, it's okay that, I'm upset with this thing. Like saying those things, I have such a resistance to it.
Yep.
And this is something I've always noticed that may seem bizarre to people, is that once I've like sort of switched into this negative mode, doing and thinking and saying and acting out the things that make it better, as I get closer to doing it, the anxiety piles on and it gets worse. So there are things like, okay, instantly don't want to eat food. So my parents would like bring me food. Them asking if I want to eat makes me more upset. And then they're like, going to get like, put the food on the plate anyway and bring it over. And thinking about that makes me more upset. And then having the plate put in front of me makes me even more upset. And then just the idea, for some reason, like me like grabbing the fork is like infuriating.
Yep.
It's like, I just want to, and the more I think about like taking the fork and like, putting the food on it or something, like I just want to like break that thing instead. It's like absolutely revolting, the idea of like putting the food in my mouth at that point. And it's just like, what kind of crazy, like this is wild. For one, it's just food. Like what?
Yeah.
And it's also the thing that you should be doing, knowing full well that every time when I'm hungry, don't eat, get this way, eating will help, doesn't matter. It's like, even almost thinking that, it's like, again, pushing away those things, like, no. So I that seems to be something that happens on stream too, where I just want to like make the thing even worse almost. And it's like, what is going on?
So
What the heck is going on here?
So it's interesting that I'm so grateful that you talk about this in the way that you do, because it makes it the stuff that I say real. Sometimes I run into a problem where when I'm talking about things, it's just so like academic, and it's like seems like it's in a vacuum. And so I appreciate so much you talking about this, because it illustrates beautifully the concept that something like severe anxiety or OCD, whatever it may be that's at play there, right? And that's not my call to make. I don't know you well enough to be able to say whether that's the case, but like anxiety desperately wants acknowledgement, like desperately. OCD and depression want to take all of the spotlight away from us, and it will figure out whatever way it can to get the spotlight off of you and to get all of it there, and it will intercept it in the weirdest ways, right? Like there's and this is in no way, I have to be very clear, this is in no way an analysis of what you just described or me diagnosing or anything. This is just me using that as an example.
Yep.
That actually picking up the fork and eating the food, knowing that that's something that like you want to do, is an act of defiance to the OCD. And so OCD is going to get real freaking pissed about that. And that happens with like any of it. So like the door locking, for example, walking upstairs and not checking the lock again is an act of defiance to the OCD. And so sometimes when people run into a space of either if I indulge the OCD, it pisses me off, or if I subvert the OCD, it gets pissed off. But because it's hard to differentiate the OCD from me, I think it's me getting pissed off. And that is something where why we want to get into like person first language with these things, you know, person with autism, person with ADHD, person with OCD, these types of things help create that distinction where a person can look in that moment and go, wait a minute, am I mad because I'm not like, am I mad because I'm actually doing this? Or is like this in defiance to a compulsion that I have that I don't maybe have a full understanding of, or maybe I do have a full understanding of? And what is it that's actually angry right now? Because if I'm doing this and I know that it's in my best interest and I'm doing this, like what part of this is the have to and which part of this is the want to? And there's a good chance that the have to is the compulsion and the want to is not. And we want to move a person's energy over to the want to. Or if the have to is important, for a person to see that it's not the compulsion itself. A compulsion has never made a person do anything. Like a compulsion does not actually manifest a behavior. It's a person's attention to the compulsion and the choice to act upon it that creates the compulsive behavior itself. And so that gets even into a space of thinking about doing a thing isn't doing a thing, which I know we talked about a little bit before with like, you know, when I was talking about bringing my mouse up, you know, me thinking about doing it isn't me actually picking the mouse up. Me thinking about, you know, doing something that's in my best interest isn't actually doing the thing. Me thinking about saying nice things to myself despite anxiety is wonderful to think about, but I'm not actually doing it until I do it. And that is it gets into this power play, as I think has been kind of a theme in what we've been talking about. There's a power play happening of what seems to be inevitable versus what do I actually have agency and control over, and how do I direct as much focus as I can into what I have control over, and acknowledge that when I do these things, I may have to do them despite an emotional experience I don't want to be having.
It's interesting, the sort of language around it, and there's sort of a silver lining to all of this stuff, which is like forcing this need to understand to a certain degree humans and just psychology, and like it brings up philosophical aspects too, because you're talking, you know, it's like you're saying like OCD wants this. It's like you speak as if it's a person, but it does feel like that. And it's like, what does that mean? Well, if it's coming from me and nothing actually external, like obviously having external influences, but like I'm the one thinking it, but I'm also the one talking to it, and also the one like, what do I want? Like, what is that? You'll have to think like, what am I, man? Like it's like, what is
true.
I even, dude? Like I've had to think
It gets existential real fast.
Yeah. I've had to think like free will stuff. Like there's like, do we have free will, man? Like these have been things that are like very, very real to me. That like when we were talking again about the idea of like seemingly watching yourself do this thing you don't want to do, it's like, what the hell is happening? If I have just this ability to like control things, Why am I not? Is it as simple as I don't want to? I don't think so, but like something weird. It's certainly not as simple as like, well, you do the things you want to do. And that's how life works, and that's how people
Yeah,
work, because you
right.
have control and you're in control of everything. It's like, yeah, I don't think it's, well, I know it's not that simple. But yeah, things definitely get super,
The
super
argument
weird.
the argument to be made, I think I have to say this in part as a therapist because I inherently believe that people are capable of change, or else how the hell would I ever do my job? Um, but I think the argument to be made is that even in those moments, unless we're talking about deeply severe psychosis, which I'm not suggesting here, I'm talking like really severe,
Yeah, I
brain
even
stuff.
had like mentioned that before when it came to the discussion. I was like, let me just be clear that these are not like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
voices like being here. It's just an internal
yeah.
dialogue. But yeah,
But that does exist. That
yeah,
does
yeah,
exist. There
that's
there there is psychosis that actually will have a person's brain operating in ways where it's like, I mean, but it still gets existential because it's not an exact science, and we still don't understand how all this
mm,
stuff manifests itself. That said, even when a person is doing the thing that they do not want to be doing, they are still making the choice to do it. Where people get roughed up and get in trouble with these things is when they cognitively make meaning out of something in a way that divests them from the agency that they have in that moment. And so we hear this a lot in people's languages or in people's language when they say things like, I had to do this, I have to do that. And they speak in absolutes. And there was a theorist in family therapy that used to say, like, he used to have this idea that you contaminate a person's absolutes, you contaminate their thoughts, because when people get into absolutes, they act weird, or they'll do things, and then that divests them from the accountability they have. Because if I said to you, um, I have to go right now, like I have to leave right now at 3:17. I have made the reason that I'm leaving this I don't have to go, but I'm making the reason I have to leave this stream at 3:17 something external. I'm saying that the reason I'm getting up and leaving is completely out of my control. It's on time. It's on Father Time, or it's on this meeting I have to do, or whatever. Now there may be some truth to that, but ultimately, even if I did have a meeting I had to attend at 3:18 p.m. Pacific time on a Wednesday, I still am the one that makes the choice to end the stream and go to that meeting. I have the option not to do that. I have the option to remain on stream with you. Like, you could get into a whole thing. Well, what are the implications of that? Well, there are always consequences to the decisions that we make. But we have to see ourselves as capable of making those decisions in the first place, because ultimately we're not generally running fully on autopilot. We do have agency over the environment to the best that we understand it. It very well could be that I'm just a vehicle of my brain, and my brain's the one that's generating all of this, and that gets into all this existential shit that we're not high enough to talk about right now. So like it's so it's like we when people get into a thing where it's like with OCD or with anxiety, it's like, yes, it feels like it's driving the bus, but ultimately the allowance of that thing to drive the bus, the attention to what it is that it's saying, is something we have influence over, and it wants us to believe that you don't. Because if we don't believe that we have influence over our environment, we get to fall back on autopilot, and it takes away whatever like anxiety we may experience by the fact that we do have influence. For some people, the world is a lot scarier if they believe they have influence over it. For other people, the world's a lot scarier if they believe they don't have influence. Either of those extremes leads to behaviors into things that end up causing us more problems than not. So we have to be able to look at the world as a mishmash of things we do have influence over and things we don't have influence over. Our emotional experience very rarely is something we have influence over. Our way of making meaning of that emotional experience, what we attend to despite that emotional experience, is within our control, and we can influence the emotional output. There are, in social settings, I have no influence over how you respond to what I say, in the same way you have no influence over how I respond. Now, you and I could say, we're going to set some boundaries here. I'm going to say this, hey, Schnapp, I'd like it if you didn't do this, or hey, Ryan, I'd like it if you did this. But ultimately, like, you still don't actually control whether I do that or
Mm.
not. We have to kind of hold it up to the fact that you and I are going to have a good synergy and we're going to respect each other in this conversation. But in a social setting like this, the only thing I have control over is what I say and how I show up to this. Do I choose to sit on the fact that I literally can't concentrate because I have to go to the bathroom so bad, or do I make the decision to ask you, "Hey, man, I gotta go to the bathroom. I'll be right back." That's something that I have influence over. Now, if you were to say something to me like, "No, you can't get up and go use
I
the
was just gonna,
restroom,"
yeah.
then at that point, that's not in my control, right? Like I threw it up to chance when I say that. If you say that in that moment, the only thing I can control is how I hold you accountable to that response and what my response to that boundary is. So if you said, "Hey, Ryan, I'd really prefer that you didn't," I am in that moment, I am presented with a choice. Do I say to you, "Well, I appreciate that you don't want me to do that, but like, I asked you as a courtesy, like, I'm going to get up and go to the bathroom. And if you're going to end stream because of that, like, okay, man, but like, I can't control that response, but I can. If you continued to like, let's say every time I answered a question, if you said that's a dog shit response, chat, don't listen to that. At some point, I have to hold you accountable to that and say, you know what, man, I don't know that I want to continue to do this interview because it doesn't seem like it's going in a direction. After I've said to you, like, hey, man, I don't really appreciate that you're saying what I have to say is dog shit. You're welcome to say like you don't agree with it or whatever, but like, let's maybe be nice about this. Like, I can do that, but if you don't do it, I don't have control over it. I can control what
Mm.
my boundaries are and what my influence is. And so that's one of those things where like we have to move to a space of accepting what it is we can't control, but recognizing what we can. And there's a chance that we are underestimating the amount of things we have control over, or overestimating. Like it depends on the person and how they've been conditioned and what they've learned and all these things. But I think a huge part of my job as a therapist to go completely meta is to help people understand where they have agency and where they don't, and what can we influence and what do we have to leave alone. And let's figure out how to optimize the way you navigate through this and deal with what you've got and find some of the changes that we know theoretically are going to hopefully move you in the direction that you've defined yourself as wanting to move in.
That's really interesting. It gets into something very Twitch specific too. And it partly gets into the power trolls have, which is they have, in one sense, all the power. We can do nothing to stop them if they want to keep doing it. We have to make them not want to do it. I know for me that's really hard. I know for other people too. Like you want to just be like, you need to get out of here, like insult them or something like that. But like if they want to do that, you can ban them. If they want to make another account, if they want to even avoid an IP ban, they can. There is zero way. You can't even get law enforcement to stop them. They will continue to do it. You have no control over that. Even knowing that, I still personally struggle with that. If I'm being honest with myself, I feel like I've mentioned this a bunch of times, like I think I actually get more upset about the people who are actually just like genuinely rude. A lot of people like get like really upset about trolls. To me, trolls is like it is actually so simple that someone's like, you suck and have a dumb face or something, and it's like, okay. And like it's like that, it can't even begin to mean anything. I'm like, all right, you don't. But someone who's like really obnoxious and rude, or someone who I actually start to care about or have some respect for, and then they say something negative, like I still don't have the control over what they're doing, but it still then makes me feel upset, and it's difficult in the moment to deal with that because it's so
Well, it becomes less
so
about what the
automatic.
person's doing and more about what it represents, right? Like now we're not
Yeah.
talking about a specific person, we're talking about getting a person, and I feel this completely as a stream. Like it brings us closer to that sense of like what I do and do not have influence over. And that becomes a lot more existential. It becomes a lot bigger. It carries a lot more emotional weight. Yeah, if it's just one person that shows up that you ban and then they never come back, I think most of us can
It's so,
brush that off.
yeah.
It's really easy to just be like, yeah, okay, well, whatever. But one of the things that I find to be interesting when we talk about these types of things in a Twitch context like this is so people who are in my community know this. I'm ridiculously quick to ban. Like I have like no tolerance for bullshit. Like I'll usually give people like the benefit of the doubt if they come in and ask a question or something, and I will try to turn it into something educational. But the second it becomes clear that that person's not contributing to the vibe of the community, they're out because I don't want one person to poison the well. Now, could that person completely, could they do that? Could they create a new account? Could they come back? Absolutely. The thing that, from a behavioral reinforcement perspective, that we often have to look at, and I would say this to any streamer who's watching this or anybody who's in a capacity where you might potentially work with trolls, it works the same way as it did when we were talking a while back with children. If people get attention, they will, so in a lot of cases, they don't care what kind of attention it is. So if a person pops into chat and they say something really nasty, and then let's say I react to it, and then I say to chat, man, I hate when people say this stuff. God, it really gets me down when this happens. I hate that people like this exist. That person's getting the reinforcement they were looking for, right? Like, and if I can look at it as my response to this is something that is relative to that person, whereas if I hit ban, and then let's say that person creates another account and they come in and they do it again and I hit ban. If you have like a very like neutral, consistent response where it's not getting any energy, you continue playing music, I continue chatting with chat, we continue doing our thing. The more we divest ourselves from giving energy to that, the less we're reinforcing the existence of that in the first place. Because not only is that person being affected, anybody who's observing that is watching it happen. And so if I'm a potential troll sitting in your chat and I see that you just ban and move on, it's not worth my time to sit there and try and get a rise out of you because I'm not seeing that get reinforced, which more often than not is what trolls are doing. They're just trying to derail it or get attention or do what they can do because many of us are conditioned to pay attention to that. Like it's by no fault of your own that you pay attention to that, right? But like there is an argument to be made that when you get troll raids and then, some people will end their stream. There's an argument to be made that that's not always the best course of action because if you end your stream, you're reinforcing that if people do this, they can get you to stop. So it becomes, you want neutral. You want to give as much reassurance, and this goes for all relationships. You want to give as much reassurance and positive reinforcement. And by positive, I don't mean good. By positive, I mean you're affirming a desirable behavior. You want to give as much energy in the things that are desirable as you can because it reinforces that. And you want to punish the things that are not desirable through utter neutrality or lack of energy. And I do this with parents. I do this, all these things, right? So if there's to bring it back to what we've been talking about with like compulsive thoughts and stuff, if compulsive thoughts are not something that a person wants to entertain, if they don't want those thoughts to receive the amount of energy they're receiving, then that comes down to when you're having moments where you're at peace, if things are going the way that you'd like them to, if you're creating the narrative that's really important in this moment, if you're behaving in a way that's in line with a realistic expectation you have for yourself, where maybe you miss a note and then you find yourself going, yeah, it's okay, it's cool, just keep moving, right? That's what we want to give energy to. That's where we want to be like, yeah, man, good for me. I was able to do that. That's a big deal. And we keep moving because that reward facilitates an increase and an uptick in desirable behavior. So if you're paying attention to the people in chat that are contributing to the safety of your environment, by the way, just as a compliment to you, I'm not going to say what night it was, but I was watching you the other night and there was a person in your chat who was utterly obnoxious and you completely ignored it. And you were giving a lot of energy to other people that were contributing to the safety of your space and like the vibe that you have. And I remember watching that thinking to myself, that's awesome the way he's handling that. So it's one of those things where like we really, and I can tell you more about it if you want to ask me offline. But I'm
curious because it's so difficult for me. Not to say it's not for other people,
really like
I give more attention to negative, and Count is saying something about it too, and maybe that's something we can address after. It's like when you feel negative, and I know I'm seeing myself, I'm like, oh my God, all these people, there's mainly people who are here, who want to be here, who are doing good things, but I'm giving my attention to the one person who said something negative, and it's like, I just can't, I find myself doing it, but sorry.
No, and it's a good piece of insight to have because I think we are wired to do that. if for no other reason than it's novel. Like it's actually kind of interesting sometimes when you have something where you're like, wait, are you kidding me? Is this shit really showing up in my chat? By the way, chat, don't worry about it. I'm not talking about anybody who's in chat right now. So like, it's like people are like, oh my God, who could it
What
be?
did I say? Yeah, what did
Yeah, no. It's all, you're all good. I promise. It's but, um, but it's one of these things where we are wired to look at it. And I think the more that we understand that we're wired to look at it, the better off we are in saying, okay, again, the 5 pounds over here means 5 pounds over here. If I'm going to give 5 pounds to trolls, I would argue you should give 10 pounds to what's desirable. Like you could weight it in that direction if you want to.
Hmm.
But like that is something that requires a level of intentional focus. Something that I do all the time on my stream. I'm not suggesting you do this. I'm just kind of as an example from how I've tried to get that in because I'm susceptible to it as well. Is I break out, we call it the whoosh. I break out probably every 15 minutes. And I will basically say, hey, to everybody who's in chat right now, I really appreciate that you're here. And so like right now, anybody who's watching us, I'm really grateful that so many people are here, are letting us chat about this, are allowing, you to be vulnerable and talking about your experiences with this stuff, are contributing to a really awesome vibe in chat. Like there hasn't really been much bullshit that's happened in chat while you and I have been talking right now. And it's awesome, right? So we want to say like, keep doing it, chat. Like this is the kind of stuff that jazzes me up. Like this is the kind of stuff where like I say to myself, hell yeah. Like, first of all, I was like, hell yeah, I want to do this with you because I already respect and admire what you do and the community that you have. But it's like, this is where I look at it and go, you guys are awesome. So thank you. For you, I appreciate that you've allowed me to be on and that you're allowing me to talk about some of this stuff and that you're engaging with me and sharing your experiences. Like giving that energy in that direction is not only awesome for the people who receive it, it's also helpful for us because it allows you to step into a space of like, there are things that I can really appreciate. There are things that are obvious. You're obviously doing something right if you have 154 people that have come in here and are watching us and are being as awesome as they are. Like that is absolutely a reflection of you and what you've built around here. And so that is something that is always worthy of note anytime it comes up. And sometimes people have this tendency to diminish those things or to not want to give homage to those things. I don't care how many times I'm going to pop out and say how much I appreciate it. If I feel a sense of appreciation, we're sharing it, right? We're gonna make sure that we know that this is something that matters to us. And then because if we spend that much energy on one person who comes in and asks a really stupid question or says something mean about me and says, Dr. Mick, you look like you're 18, you're a piece of shit, and I hate your message. Like if I was to derail us because of that and basically be like, I can't believe that person would say that, man. Like, how could you? Like I could get into a whole spiral with that. And if I do that, I've taken all the energy away from all the people who are contributing to this space in an awesome way. I'm taking away from you. I'm taking away from all of it. And so that's not designed to get a person into a blame spiral if they find themselves like doing that. Like that's not me saying this is an indictment on your attention to negativity in chat because that's a natural process. It comes down to how we are intentional in the way that we shift our energy when these things happen, knowing that they're possible, that they can happen.
It's so tough for me to express that gratitude in a way that I feel like is significant. I know I'm not the only one. This happens in a lot of ways too, which is like someone maybe donates or give, like maybe it's a huge donation or something or subs and like it's like, oh, saying thank you just kind of isn't enough. Or like oftentimes what I've noticed just in my past before even streaming too is I don't seem to come across the way I think I do and the way I say things and express gratitude. Like sometimes it can come across, how do you say it? Like I don't seem to do it how other people do it, whether that's good, bad, or neither or something. Like I'm not someone who's gonna be like, oh my god, this is crazy. I'm not the streamer who like breaks, like, oh my god, we broke the streamer. You're crying, I'm not crying. Like that doesn't happen. I'll just sit here and it's like the craziest one. There was this person a year ago. It's just insane support. And it was like, I'm not even kidding, donated in one night $15,000, and I was like, it was the craziest thing ever. And like, it's like,
What to do with that? Yeah.
I was like, like, what do I feel like I should, and then actually, it actually makes things worse. My reaction, because then I feel guilt. Oh, what a perfect time for the negative stuff to come up, because now it's like I'm not showing appreciation. Now people see me as like, this is the craziest thing. You should be crying. Like, no one's actually saying this, but like I'm saying it for them to myself. You should be crying. Every other streamers break down and start crying and sobbing at like $100 this thing. Like, you're gonna come across as like ungrateful, all this stuff, and it's just like, oh my god. Getting to the original thing of like showing the appreciation, perhaps coming up with a routine or of some sort to express that appreciation, because I'd like people to know I just feel like I'm not very good at it.
So what's really what's really interesting about this, and I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna say this as in general of a way as I can. It's funny because it comes down to we draw attention sometimes to things. We overestimate that people see what we see. So if a person believes that they are not expressing a thing in a way that they should be expressing it, there's two questions. The first one is always like, where'd you learn that that's not good enough? That's a whole other can of worms. But also, people generally do not see that until attention is drawn toward it. So we'll see that I'm guilty of this too. We'll throw qualifiers out in front of our actions sometimes. We might say something like, oh man, I'm really not good at expressing this, and then we'll try to express it or something like that. And you've biased the sample when you do that, because the spotlight effect tells us that nobody pays as much attention to that as we do. Nobody makes meaning out of it the same way we do until we basically suggest that they do that. So it's no different than, if I was to say something like, I'm really bad at answering this question, man. Like, I'm really bad at articulating the remainder of this thought. Now I've instilled doubt in your head that what I'm about to say is going to be useful. Like, I've basically taken my insecurity about whatever I'm experiencing and I've projected it onto you, and I've made it your problem. Whereas you very well, if I hadn't said that, probably might have said, wow, thank you for saying that. That's really insightful. I really appreciate what you had to say there. And if there's a disconnect between my ability to hear that feedback and internalize it, say, wow, there must be some truth to that. If he's going to say to me that he appreciated that, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you meant it. Like, I don't believe you're acting in bad faith here. You've never done anything to show me that that's the case. And so I have to give you the benefit of the doubt and make sure that I'm only drawing insecurity to myself insofar as it affects maybe the way that I show up or maybe how I try to do something a certain way. But if I outwardly qualify it and throw it onto people, it kind of makes it their problem, as opposed to it being something that they're often going to overlook. And then that brings in the intensity of the anxiety experience of, if I don't qualify this and a person sees it and says something like, man, you're not really good at expressing appreciation, it's probably going to hurt because you didn't get out in front of it and own it and say, well, yeah, I already told you I'm bad at expressing appreciation. So, yeah, thanks, I guess. But I already know that to be the case, as opposed to being like, oh, okay, well, this person thinks I'm not good at it, but look at these 150 other people who have said absolutely nothing about how I express appreciation because I'm probably doing it fine. So it gets into all the relativity and all that existential crap too. But all that is to say is, like, when we define terms for what it is that we want to be, how we want to show up in a given space, we want to make those things as concrete as we possibly can, so that even if it doesn't necessarily feel right in the moment, we still know what the concrete metric is for how to do it. And that is easier said than done. It's like, I know that. Yeah. I know that. Because there have been, I'll be honest with you, there have been probably like 10 times while we've been talking where I absolutely have wanted to ask you a question that I can't ask you. in order to get more information about how it shows up and like really prod in, because there is so much complexity and like nuance and personal experience with how these things show up, whether it be for me or for you, with the way these things manifest. That um, having to these are things that sometimes we do have to bore down into, that we can't just conceptually talk about, and it makes a difference. Which is why my hope, anytime I have these conversations, whether it's here directly with you, whether it's with Chad or anybody that's watching it right now, that if anything that you or I have said creates a template or a launching pad for an alternative way of conceptualizing or talking about something with somebody like a therapist who is able to do an assessment and ask some of those questions and bore down into it in a much more sophisticated way than like I can do within my limitations of being on Twitch, then we've done our job with this, right? If somebody said, "Oh man, like I heard Schnapp say this, and I connect with that, and I want to talk to somebody about this who can help me make sense of what this means for me," or I heard Dr. Mick say this, and that was, "Oh my God, I've never thought about my procrastination as being an anxiety avoidance. I want to bring that up with my therapist, or I want to talk to my friends about that." That's us doing our job with this.
I think so. And that was like the hope too. That's generally the other part of when I talk about these things on stream in general. One is like, for me, it just seems to be the best way to go about it, because avoiding it doesn't seem to work well. But someone even said right before you even came on that like just doing the stream sort of inspired them to reach back out to their therapist, or just therapy in general. I can't remember the exact wording, and do something like that. So that's always great. So I'm glad we're able to do that. And another thing too, although I think you have to go soon, but just in the future,
I got
and just in
about
general,
15 minutes, so
Okay.
we're good for about 15
yeah, it's letting me
minutes.
know. I am totally, as long as you think like it doesn't cross like ethical lines for you, I'm basically willing to talk about whatever, even
Yeah,
in public, which is like. So it's
I wish I could.
just the thing, like it's so if it's because like you don't think you can do it or something like that, whatever, then let that be the reason. But don't. I'll say if I don't feel comfortable or something. But, like
Yeah.
as I've said, I'll just straight up say it. Like it ain't sound messed up to people. Like I'll just say whatever the thing is. I'll just, even if it's like really like
Yeah.
kind of dark or whatever. It's like damn, like I don't mind.
Yeah.
So don't worry about it. So don't worry about that. But
Yeah, I have to. It's tricky because there are the way I have to make the distinction. And if anybody in chat's even curious about how I make this distinction when I'm streaming, there are questions that I know I'm asking because I'm just a curious human being, and because like I care about you and I'm interested. And then there are questions that I know I'm only asking because I have the knowledge as a therapist to know to ask it. And when those questions show up in my head, I can't ask them. When the questions of curiosity come up, and those are a little bit more okay for me to ask and like be curious about and kind of and poke around and ask, because you've mentioned how you're open to like answering questions and stuff. It's a little bit easier. Also, like if you're sharing stuff, it's easier for me to riff off of it. Kind of like today, like you've said some stuff, and then I'm like, okay, cool. Like I can kind of take this and make it something where I'm not having to drill down into your experience directly. So, I honestly, this has been exactly what I hoped it would be in terms of like how it would flow. So I am, I think that's really cool. Like I'm not sitting here going like, ugh. Like it's been very much where I would hope it would be. And I'm not afraid to ask you stuff if I've got it. I always have to make that distinction in my head. Am I asking this because I know to ask it as a therapist? Because like I could really go somewhere with this. Because it's not cool for me to do that.
I tried to do what I could on a few different levels to make that happen too. And I'm also glad because like had all these questions and stuff, and I didn't want to be like, what do you think about this thing? And it's like you say that thing, it's like, okay, all right, cross that one off. Number 2,
Next.
what do you think about this? Because it's now literally been 3 hours, and I have yet to just like go to the list and be like, all right, next one, which is what I was
woven a couple
which
in.
is what I was hoping. I tried.
I've been pretty good. I was like, I know where that question came from. Yeah.
If you guys don't know, I sent these questions over before, because I
Yep.
wanted to hit it. It's tough because there's other things too that I would like to talk about. Another thing, even things people have been saying in chat, which are totally different too, which is it does get into like the specific advice thing, and I've been hesitant. It's like, what do I do in this situation?
Yeah.
Which is definitely something I would like and that other people want too, but it's tough because we talk about what the issues are and sort of talk about them generally, but a lot of it has come down to, well, what the heck do you do about it besides like, we'll see a therapist, because it's like
Yeah,
I'm doing
no, I
that and I
know.
have been doing that, and there's like medication stuff. So maybe that's another thing too that I wanted to. I actually asked my therapist yesterday. I said, I'm going to be talking with someone. I gave him like a little bit of background on the situation and stuff. And I was like, what, do you have any questions for this person I'm going to be talking to? Because he's going to have, it's like, what are you guys behind the scene, like not behind the scenes, but like from like the professional side, like what do you think I may not, someone who doesn't do this professionally, like what do you maybe have like as a question or something that you think would help you out? And I'm going to almost pose that question to you. Is there anything you can think of that you can bring from your, maybe just your own personal experience, professional experience, or what I would imagine maybe is the most important one is like specific knowledge about streaming stuff that could help this person out, my normal therapist who doesn't, my regular therapist who just like doesn't know
Oh,
about
okay.
online right? Like it doesn't.
Yeah.
Although apparently
Yeah.
he like play like some World of Warcraft, so I was like, really? Okay. But still streaming stuff he doesn't know. Is there something you could see as being?
That's a cool question, actually. I really like that. I think streaming, just by virtue of being something that you're doing publicly and where you're willing to share what's going on as openly as you are, it is going to invite in a multiple levels of reinforcement for how you choose to navigate the way you talk about it and show up. And I think that's something that a person who doesn't know the streaming world probably isn't going to fully understand, which is if you, let's say, for example, you have a moment on stream where some of the spiral happens. And let's say you've been working with your therapist and you've come up with a plan for the alternative thing that you're going to try to do the next time that happens. And let's say you do that and you are like proud of the fact that you did it. But then somebody in chat says something that almost seems like a punishment for what you did, like the alternative thing you did. It puts you into a very weird space because you know that you did the thing that you were trying to do, but you are also at the mercy of a context where somebody doesn't understand what you did and you don't owe it to them to explain it, but it's going to have ramifications of reinforcement through stream in the form of engagement and viewership and stuff like that. So one of the things that may be worth conversing about, and you honestly thinking about too, now that we're talking about this in this way, is, and this isn't a therapeutic advice so much as it is for you to think about and bring to your therapist as something that might be worth talking about, is what undesirable aspects of it are being rewarded by streaming and what desirable aspects of it are being punished. Like, are there things that actually happen on stream that are serving as reinforcements of some of the things that you're trying to work against, so that you can figure out what some of the controls are that you can put in and influence so that those things have less influence as a reinforcement mechanism for what you're trying to work through? Does that make sense?
Yeah, let me actually. Okay, let me try to even put this because I won't remember even if I did have it perfectly thought out. So, so like, what are things that reinforce the sort of negative behavior, the undesirable behaviors? Is that what you're Did he?
undesirable thought patterns, behaviors, things that you would say that you want to work on in therapy.
What are we? Well, let's do. Okay, that makes sense. And then also the like sort of opposite version, the positive one. What are the things to like those to now focus on?
Yeah, like what also does stream like I mean the way that your therapist will probably understand it this way is if you say like I want to talk about the ways in which streaming reinforces both positively and negatively my goals and struggles. And that should make sense.
Sorry, could you
To
say
your
that? Could
therapist.
you say that
Yeah,
one
yeah, yeah.
again?
So what are the ways in which streaming reinforces both positively and negatively what I'm working on and what my goals are?
Okay.
Because and just so I'm clear with chat so that and maybe even with you so that they understand, when I say positive and negative reinforcement, I don't mean good reinforcement, bad reinforcement. What I mean is by positive is a reaction or a mechanism that facilitates a continued or increased use of a certain input. And when negative, I mean is something that's put in place to or removed to prevent that thing from continuing to escalate. So an example might be if you are in an anxiety spiral on stream and you're live, what are the ways in which the stream setup, whether it's through chat, the numbers, like whatever it is that you're paying attention to in those moments, what facilitates an increase in that anxiety spiral? What fuels it? Versus what is something in streaming that might intercept that and actually help you achieve whatever your goal might be, where potentially you cover something up or you engage with chat in a different way or whatever it might be. I don't know what that would be. That's for you guys to figure out. But there are ways in which streaming, by putting you in a public eye and by being a parasocial relationship with as many people as are watching you, there are going to be ways that it rubs on your goals and your struggles. And it's going to highlight them in certain ways. And so if you and him are having a conversation with about how that also influences you, given that this is something you do, I don't know if you do this for a living or if it's something you do to augment what you do for a living, but like that this is something that you're doing frequently, you can help kind of build in some treatment planning around it.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. One of the things I'm thinking that's like the classic is hiding the viewer count. That seems to be that's something I did a long time ago, and that seems to be a huge one for people. Don't be looking at the number in real time all the time. Like,
it's a false. Twitch gives a lot. To Twitch's discredit, Twitch gives a lot of really bad metrics for smaller streamers like us. Like the metrics are not really designed in such a way that facilitates a sense of like hope and pride and excitement. It's one of those things where like because of the way that numbers and the statistics of streams are set up, like you really only are ever going to see that as real reward once it hits a certain threshold. Otherwise, it's like streamers are always working against their numbers, and that is like a terrible space to be in so many ways. And I've been slave to that too. I've had to kind of create certain controls in my own life about making sure what I consider to be success or not, and kind of reconnecting with those things. So it's definitely a struggle.
That's actually. I wish there was more time. We will have to talk again because that brings up a whole other thing. That if you saw there was a little section on it, which is like the Twitch specific stuff, which is like what could they be doing different? What are some things you see that are issues here? There are clearly serious issues. Some things can be made better. Some just can't. Some you can only do certain things. Like the troll one will be forever an issue. I mean, Twitch can only do so. You can only do so much. They can, and they already do. Even like one of the newer things they implemented, it was like I was like, man, I don't even know how much that's really good. People can avoid it. Twitch will never be able to, unless they're going to get to the point where somehow like law enforcement gets to the point where like a troll will be able to actually like automatic message gets sent out to police. They track that. It's like, yeah, no way.
Oh,
There will be trolls. But it's like, what are some other things? And it seems like there's so much like Twitch specific that I feel like
There's
we could,
lots of great conversations to have. Yes,
yeah.
I agree. Well, I do have to run. So,
Yeah.
but before I go, I want to say to you, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun to talk to you. And this is the first time you and I have ever actually talked directly to each other.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
very cool to actually be able to talk to you, as opposed to just kind of being in your chat. As I said before, I love what you do on Twitch. I really hope you continue to do it and that you continue to get a lot of growth because you absolutely deserve it. I love your channel. So it's an honor for me to be able to join you. To your chat, thanks for being so cool with having me along. I hope that any questions that I've answered or anything that I've said has been helpful in some way, and that you have found this to be a meaningful experience. I'm sure you have, given that so many people have stuck around for it. I'm really grateful for the fact that you brought me on, dude. It was a lot of fun.
Well, thank
We'll
you.
do it again.
And I appreciate. We definitely have to. And I thank you. I don't. This is again one of those situations where it's like, I appreciate you coming on and doing this. It was a big chunk of your time, and it was a situation where you might like not have known exactly what's going on or whatever, because I didn't even know what was going on. So it's like, I'm glad you enjoyed it too, and we'll definitely have to talk more. So thank you for being on.
Yeah, man, you bet. So I'll say this to you because I always say this when I sign off, and I see people in chat telling me to say it, so I'm going to say it to you, and I'll say it to chat. I say a little thing before I leave, and I actually do mean this for you specifically and for everybody in chat, which is that you matter, your experiences are valid, and don't let anybody ever tell you otherwise. All right. Have a wonderful night, my man. Enjoy the rest of your stream, and we will talk soon.
Thanks. Take care.
I did. Take it easy.